What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and patch 13.12 is upon us. I am a game designer on the Summoner's Rift team, and as time goes on, I become ever so slightly more and more important to the patches as they come in, as people move to developing preseason, as I get my feet under me more and get more acclimated to what's going on. I get trusted with slightly larger projects, slightly more work. This is one of the first patches where there's changes that not only did I pitch in the first place, but then did the work, and of course had all the help with playtesting and analysis and whatnot. But one of the projects that I was like, oh, I think we should do this, and people are like, yeah, we should do that, and then we're seeing the results here in this patch. That's the Rumble update. But cool stuff going on here. I'll give context when it's time for it in each individual section. Patch 30.12 is a rather large patch. We got our first small glimpse of pro play. By the time we locked down this patch, we essentially only had week 1 of the LPL and basically no looks at the LCK. Of course, no LCS or LEC either. We had enough data from solo queue to actually react to these systems in a more meaningful way, and so a large portion of what this patch was about was, okay, take a big holistic look at pro play, at well, as much as you can in pro play, so that one's tough, but let's look at how the systems have shaken up, how everything has shaped up after the patch. People have started to settle into their builds. Who is left without a home? Who's not doing too well? Where are we at now? Okay, so this is a lot of what this was. I helped look at AD carry in that I basically took the items myself. Since I designed the item update, I went and dove into the items for AD carries, less so the champions, although I spoke a bit with the designer who did AD carry champions. I was tasked with support and jungle in terms of, hey, let's identify which champions we should actually affect here. I will say, with limited pro data, we didn't make a lot of pro adjustments for jungle, which you'll see here. I was also, with the Rell midscope that shipped last patch, at the very, very end, so the way that we work with midscopes and new champion updates is there is a Summoner's Rift team designer that is attached to the project. And we're basically there as guidance on balance levers and being more experts on elo skew and whatnot. And there's other high level players that are also attached to these projects, but in terms of hey, we're doing balance adjustments to Rell. So there's a designer who was on Rell who then went on who took time off the week before she shipped, and so I took over as I guess the balance consult or SRT consult for Rell towards the very end, which means that once we shipped the Rell micro patch in 13.11 and then had to furthermore ship nerfs for Rell in 13.12, I was essentially the expert on balance changes for that, in terms of here's what I think we're gonna get for magnitude, here's what I think the good levers are. So all the design work of making Rell a cool champion wasn't me in the slightest. Picking the actual nerfs and buffs, I get a bit more credit for the good and the bad of what happened there. So some context around Rell. But again, I had jungle and support. So I took on support items. I suggested a bunch of supports for nerfs, some jungle, a couple of jungle hits there. Anyway, let's go into the patch itself because there's a whole bunch going on, and let's talk about it. I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on. Okay, so first up, right, the investigation into AD carry and support showed that Ashe is underperforming on the new patch. She's not doing terribly well in mid-season. She's especially poor in support. We had specifically nerfed her out of support earlier on in the year. This was around 13.3 or 13.4 when she was pretty much 100% pick ban as a support. That felt kind of unfair. And so let's bring her down a little bit. And now that Pro has kind of shaken back up and we're moving back towards tanks in the support role, okay, we can give support Ashe a bit more power. I think it's reasonable. Again, Ashe AD carry, not doing terribly strong either. And so a different designer was tasked with finding up, someone who wasn't me, was tasked with finding out, magnitudes and what we wanted to do goal-wise, and so this was the change list. It is basically plus auto attack damage of 5%. Now, just a kind of a note on how the math works out here, right? Of course, if you buy crit chance, you increase this, you move toward plus 75% on this part of the equation, which of course, is not 5% more damage in high crit builds because, right, it's 190 becomes 195 is not 5% more, of course. But on the other side of that, if you build a Rage Blade and you convert crit into on-hit damage, that doesn't use this at all. So in terms of like this being a buff for a crit build versus a buff for a Rageblade build, as long as you're actually buying the stat attack damage and the stat attack speed, you get sort of full effect of this buff. If you're playing an on-hit champion, Wit's End and Blade of the Rune King and Rageblade Diversion doesn't touch this at all. This does, I think, mathematically buff crit builds more than on-hit builds. Right now, Infinity Edge and Rageblade are really, really comparable items on Ashe. As far as I can tell, the builds are really close in power level. This is a slight nudge toward Infinity Edge type builds. Because, again, Rageblade on-hit gets functionally nothing from this buff, and IE builds get some. Volley plus 10 damage is obviously a support focus buff. Enchanted Crystal Arrow plus AP ratio is a support focus buff. I saw the meme comments on Reddit that it's a Silas buff. I mean, it is that as well, to be fair, but this is, hey, support Ashe buys things like Mandate. And so an ability power ratio buff is technically going to be a little bit of a support Ashe buff, though obviously a pretty small one. I don't think Ashe is going to be like 50% win rate support out of nowhere, but this is going to do a little bit. Sorry about that really, really bright flashbang warning. Let me actually zoom in. I forgot to zoom in here. So here is, if you're going to scale to 100% crit chance, here is the amount of actual damage throughput via the passive, and it's 4 to 3% more total auto attack damage. Even if you are building full crit chances, to be fair, it's not assuming Infinite Edge to add even more percent to it, but that would, of course, be the case here as well. This is just simply volley damage on an example build. This is looking at a relatively normal-looking Ashe build with some bonus AD and saying how much more damage you deal, and this is pretty meaningful, right? This is a pretty meaningful Ashe buff, and this is going to be a solid amount of win rate. I didn't bother doing the math for the R because it's not that big of a deal. Speaking of people that I didn't do math for is Gangplank. So yeah, Gangplank, we nerfed the cooldowns on Powder Kegs. Back when his core build was a lot of ability haste. Now that he's subbed out Prowler's Claw for a Collector as his third item, he's getting less ability haste in his build overall. Also going into Quick Blades. Quick Blades has less ability haste than it used to. It only gives 15 instead of 20. And so Gangplank having less haste overall as a champion, basically Powder Kegs come back in. I think there is sort of an acceptable cadence sort of for Powder Kegs. Again, a different designer chose to revert this change, although I think it was a decent option here to say, well, Gangplank's getting less haste, we can go ahead and get his barrels a bit more common, and we can do that, and that'll be fine. So I think it's pretty reasonable. Cool stuff, Gangplank. Next is Gragas. The funny thing about Gragas is at no point has he actually been truly overpowered. He's been a relatively popular pro pick. He's been like the number 7-ish champion in pro play for the whole year. Apparently people aren't happy with a champion being the number 7 pro champion, sitting at around like 60% presence for the entire year. Apparently that's too stale. So this is interesting because, I'm going to go on my little like really brief tirade here, which is, I don't really want to hear anyone ever say that we should wait and let pros adapt, because they don't. Or at least viewers in average aren't willing to wait for this. So like, we generally didn't change the bot lane meta much in the spring split. There was a very, very small Jinx buff and a very, very small Aphelios buff, but like generally speaking, the bot lane didn't really change very much throughout the year. And people were like, wow, bot lane's really stale. How dare you do this? We didn't change jungle very much except to like include Lee Sin finally for a bit. And people were like, wow, it's really stale seeing Vi and Wukong every single game. And Gragas has been like a number, again, vaguely like the number 7 champion in pro. And he's like kind of flexed around, but he's like kind of there, but like never 100% pick ban. People are like, wow, sure is stale seeing Gragas all the time. So apparently no one actually wants us to let the pros adapt and figure out counters over time, because I think we were like pretty intentionally light touch on pro play throughout the spring split. And for MSI was like, okay, we're just going to buff a few things in, like we get a little bit of Nidalee. Cool, we got some like Nidalee presence, which was kind of nice, right? And so some of our shots actually landed, but apparently no one actually wants to watch pros adapt over time because they don't. So what you've told us you want from everyone's comments on Reddit is you actually want a revolving door in pro play, and that's what I've learned from people talking. So next time someone says, why doesn't Riot just let pros adapt? It's because they don't, and you guys don't want to watch them do it. That's what I can tell from comments I have seen about the meta is we got rid of anything that was like 100% pick ban and let people go on from there, and people don't want to see 80% Vi for the whole year. So that's what I've learned, right? That's what I've learned in trying to be really slow on pro play for the split, is people don't like that. Also, Gragas is not strictly overpowered. As much as people are playing him, y'all aren't losing to Gragas. Like, you realize that, right? At every single MMR, Gragas is sub 50 in every single role he plays. You may not enjoy playing as Gragas, and that is fine. Like, that is acceptable feedback, but to be like XD Lamau, this turbo overpowered quadruple flex giga busted Gragas, it's like Gragas is 48% in every single role in every single elo. So no, he's not busted, or at least he's theoretically busted, but on average, your opponents are bad at Gragas, and so you tend to win when your opponents are Gragas against you. But again, this is apparently not okay for people. And I'm not like, your feelings are valid in the sense that, like, if you don't want to play against Gragas, fine. I'm not saying he's the best design champion in League of Legends, but, like, he's not winning a bunch of games. Like, he's not. He's objectively not winning a bunch of games in pretty much any server, in any elo, in any role. And that's why we were really slow to go ahead and nerf Gragas, because he's not a top tier pro champion. He is up there, right? He's like an A or B tier pro champion. Okay, but apparently I don't want to see pros adapt. And he's not overpowered in solo queue because he's not actually winning more than half his games, but y'all don't care about that. So yeah, we didn't nerf Gragas for a while because it wasn't actually a problem, except that Reddit complained a lot. And at a certain point, a secondary thing is, hey, Gragas does have a really, really, really absurd amount of health regen. That's valid. That's actually a true statement. Gragas has a really absurd amount of health regen. I think it's totally reasonable to be like, hey man, I don't like how much health Gragas sustains. I can never poke him out of lane. Okay, that's a valid point. That is an accurate statement and true and, like, based in reality. I don't know. It's a weird pet peeve of mine that people say things are OP when what they mean is, I don't enjoy this exact facet of the gameplay, which is a fine thing to say, by the way. That's useful feedback. When you say something's overpowered and they win 40% of their games, you're probably not accurate. I mean, you might be. There's some champions who are overpowered, but everyone's bad at them. Kante is probably a good example of this. His Master Curve, by the way, is incredibly sharp. It takes like 20 games to hit 50% win rate, but then it keeps going up to the right. But people just mostly don't have 20 games of Kante yet. But this champ's obviously very, very strong. But Gragas does not have a Kante learning curve. You know, like this champ is not actually. Anyway, Gragas having much less sustain, I think, is a very, very good change. We went for a small compensation buff. This is certainly a pretty small compensation buff. I think he will still lose win rate on the patch. Let's go ahead and look at what these mean numbers-wise, and this is the amount of healing. If you press your passive on cooldown perfectly, here's how much health per minute your passive provides you. This is the total math accounting for his base stats as well, his base health regen. I forget, I did the math like literally an hour ago to build this patch rundown out. I forget if I picked just the champion's base health or if I actually included an example build for the champion. I think it's just base health. So the actual nerf of his health regen is actually larger than this. Now keep in mind, this is the literal perfect health regen possible of use your passive on cooldown perfectly at all times and never run out of mana and you never like miss a window here. That's obviously fraudulent, so it's never going to be actually this red. Because, you know, there's just going to be times where you're going to cast it, you know, at a different time frame. So this is a little bit fake, but directionally, of course, this is what happens. And I think, again, totally reasonable to nerf the champion's regen. It's very, very high. That's totally fine to do. I think a longer cooldown cadence where it's still an impactful button press when it happens. The pass is up, you press W, the pass is up, you press Q. Like, it's good for that button to, like, do something meaningful. But, yeah, he doesn't need to have it, you know, really, really, really high health regen. And so, pretty reasonable change here. Okay, next is Kante. Kante, of course, is a pro play problem. He is the highest presence top laner and has been for almost the entire year. We do have a task ongoing for either point 13 or point 14 to try to ship some pro skewed nerfs. Again, Kante is not. I mean, his winner is obviously low in solo queue. A lot of this is mastery curve. Or he is a harder to play champion, and most people, even in high MMR, by the way, because his win rate by MMR is actually not that skewed. If you go look at, like, what's his win rate in silver, what's his win rate in gold, what's his win rate in platinum, what's his win rate in, like, Masters Plus, and it's like, oh, it's still sub 50 in Masters Plus. So, like, even the really high MMR players haven't put enough games on Kante to, on average, do well in Kante. Obviously, pro players have, right? They play a lot more League of Legends, so a champion who requires a lot of mechanical skill and a lot of learning the combos is going to tend to perform in the exact skill bracket where people play League of Legends for a living. Shocking, you know, that he's really, really good in those hands. So, yeah, really, really high skill curve champion. Either way, lowering some of his combo potential by lowering the equivalent feels like a pretty reasonable direction for me. I think that's fine. Again, there is a larger task for trying to say, like, trying to investigate what we want to do at Kante in the midterm. Again, he's not necessarily weak. He is low win rate because people are bad at him. But there is a good chance that, like, oh, the champion is actually pro skewed for some reasons, or no, it's really just mastery curve and people will get there long term. I don't know the answer to this. It's not my task to investigate. I'm sure I'll see the findings when the designer comes back with them, and then we'll act, and, you know, we'll hopefully get Kante in a spot where he is, you know, relevant in pro. I think it is fine if Kante is like in pro play. I think he's a relatively cool champion who does really cool things. He's pretty flashy. But yeah, obviously he's the number one top laner in pro. Obviously he needs to be nerfed, so 1.5 seconds on the E cooldown seems reasonable. So here is, I decided to overachieve a very little bit, I guess. And this is accounting for roughly how much ability haste he's going to normally buy in the game. And so the base cooldown of 9 to eventually 7 seconds. This is a sort of interpolation of how much ability haste he gets over the course of the game. And so the functional cooldown by level 18 goes to 5.2 seconds. It is now 6.3. Don't mind the fact that this is green. Larger means, of course, a longer cooldown. The percentages would be, like, these would be the same percentages no matter how much haste he has, but in terms of what is the actual throughput of this ability in the real world, this is the actual cooldown for what actually happens to this champion. Using his most common solo queue full item build and just interpolating, eventually finishing that whole build, this is what he's going to look like. Next is Kaisa. So Kaisa is a champion who was identified as one who didn't do so well after the mid-season changes, especially when Stormrazor's 5 AD got nerfed. People were doing Stormrazor Rageblade, and that was giving them pretty fast Q evolve. When Stormrazor got nerfed by 5 AD, and I think rightly so, it meant that Kaisa had somewhat awkward times finding good evolves. It meant she had to like add an extra longsword somewhere or move stuff around, and so we wanted to make the Kaisa evolves easier to land. We knew that evolve specifically was going to be something we were going to look at. And so I talked with the designer who ended up doing the work here. And I guess my suggestion was like, hey, I think AD growth is probably a reasonable stat here. And he agreed because AD growth feeds into thresholds, not base AD, not runes. It's items and base AD. And it's like, well, items and AD growth. I misspoke. And it's like, well, if she gets more AD growth, like, she's going to have better breakpoints. And it's like, I just, just sort of offhand, I don't know what he did. I didn't like watch over the dude's shoulder or anything, but I'm like, it's probably reasonable if you like just like spreadsheet it out and like, what kind of breakpoints you want to hit at what levels. And I actually think that he came away with really good breakpoints. I think this is actually a really good change. I know it's going to look kind of small on paper. Let's talk about it, right? Because obviously the buff itself, this is a lot of win rate, by the way. This is over 1% win rate of attack damage growth. So this is 1% by itself. Plus, it's giving Kaisa specific powers, which is it's giving her a Q evolve a level or 2 levels sooner, which is also some power, right? So that's a big deal, right? So let's talk about what goes on here, which is some stuff. Okay. Kaisa, right. So here is just her base AD before and after. This is just simple, like, hey, by the way, she has more base AD. She's a stronger champion. But here is how much AD you need in items in order to get your evolve. And so right before, it was this one, right? And this was Stormrazor giving 55 and Rageblade giving 30, right? Her old Stormrazor Rageblade build gave her the evolve at level 10. And now it gives the evolve at level 10. If she wants to do Stormrazor Rageblade, it's back, right? But what it also does is say, oh, by the way, but you can also do like Kraken Slayer, Rageblade, Doran's Blade. That's going to be 78. Bam, right? There you go. There's your next one. Okay. If you want to do Static Shiv, if you want to do Static Shiv Rageblade, because that's what, 45 and 30? Bam. If you're somehow behind, Static Shiv, Rageblade hits you right here. Or if you had a Doran's Blade, I think Static Shiv Pickaxe. Doran's Blade gets you like around here or something like this. So anyway, I think the evolves actually line up really, really well. I also want to point out, by the way, that it seems, and this was like the express goal of giving Shiv an AP ratio, is Kaisa's most performant build is actually Static Shiv and then in either order Rageblade Nashor's Tooth, and playing a very hybrid on hit bursty build where like the Shiv AP ratio gives you really sick wave clear, and you have like just a very unique combat pattern of energize, the meaningful part of your damage output. You're doing an AP build, so magic damage is part of your build, so like avoid stuff kind of lines up with this. Rageblade's percent hybrid pen actually lines up with the outputs you have, where like your Q evolve hits, your W evolve hits, you have this lightning damage going on, you've got like 3 elements running around. Like there's some really cool shit out there. Varus is a very similar one where he's actually got a pretty good hybrid AP build, and this is like why I wanted to make sure like possible Rageblade champions had decent AP ratios so that going Nashor's Rageblade would feel good, and that like Shiv was literally meant to be a bridge item in like putting together like crit items to Rageblade to Nashor's Tooth, and you had like a good item that you're like, and then you're happy to build first in like an AP on hit build. And so like the exact builds I was looking for, we actually see right now on Varus and Kaisa. I think it's super sick, and I'm glad we actually landed them. And yeah, I really do recommend you actually try those builds out because I think they're super, super sick. And it's a pretty good try evolve build to get Nashor's Rageblade Shiv on Kaisa. So I think it's really, really cool. Either way, that's the math there. Those are the breakpoints. I think it's really cool stuff. All right, so Khazix loses 3 attack damage. Khazix was my recommendation coming out of the jungle investigation. I had a bunch of pro nerfs that we just punted because we ran out of time. Like we populated a bunch of tasks and said, okay, we want to like make these like 15 champion changes and these like 7 item changes, and we have limited QA resources, and so we, you know, and design resources, to be fair. Like the investigation took us the rest of the week. Right, like the sprint starts on the Wednesday or whatever, and then we it's like what how's the math work out? Sorry. The patch goes live, and then a week after the patch goes live, the sprint starts. So we had our sprint, and it was like, okay, this is most of our time for this sprint is going to be make a follow-up patch for midseason now that we have data to ship in 13.12. And halfway through the sprint, 13.11 finally ships. And so as we start digging through 13.11 data, which is nerf to Gale Force, nerf to Storm Razor, buff to Quick Blades, right, buff to Shiv, buff to Kraken Slayer, all the other stuff we did. There was some retuning on things like Echoes of Helia and whatnot. It's like, okay, well, we need to see the data on these items and on these champions in order to act. And it's like, okay, well, the patch goes live on Wednesday. We spend Thursday and Friday investigating. We build our list of topics, and then we have Monday and Tuesday to implement, to QA, and then lock by Wednesday afternoon. And like, that's the time frame, right? If we're going to react to 13.11 with a semblance of data, we get like 2 days to investigate and 2 days to implement. And there are only so many of us on the team. We have only so many designers. We have only so much QA. And so, you know, I think we could have nerfed Vi. I think we could have nerfed Wukong. We could have done pro skew jungle stuff. We didn't. We can pick this up later. We can, if pros still are not moving off of these champions in 12.12, or, you know, as we start watching 12.11 pro play, which is going to be happening around now, and, you know, we don't see any new winners in solo queue in 13.12, and in, you know, elite, if suddenly like Kindred is the big thing in elite, and we know pro is going to move over to Kindred a lot more, or Graves a lot more, or whatever, we don't have to act on Vi, like we can choose that. But right, we're halfway through developing 13.13 right now. Right, it's Tuesday night. We're gonna meet on Thursday to get a bunch of targets. We're gonna meet on Tuesday to like really like define what we're gonna do. We're gonna get a couple of days to react to the patch, and it's like, well, we never get to see pros play on 13.12, right? By the time we have to lock the patch. So yeah, we are a week away from locking patch 13.13, by the way, and this patch hasn't been shipped yet, right? I've seen 0 data from this patch so far, right? And we are a week away from locking the patch because that's how this works. So just like more clarification, this is how the patch cycle works, right? This is how this all goes down. And I've been working on 13.13 for the last week, right? I think there's some really cool stuff in there. We'll talk about it when it's time for it, but obviously off topic. Anyway, Khazix, I think when I checked, was the highest ban rate champion in League of Legends. He was slightly strong in solo queue. Obviously incredibly high ban rate, so yeah, Khazix gets to get dropped down a little bit. That's totally reasonable. 3 AD does not change his PvP at all. So the designer who did this, Phlox, who did the isolation change to the follow buffs on Khazix, he's like, no, I'm really certain that Khazix's PvP damage needs to be high. This champion needs to actually kill you if it can stop you and you're isolated. Like, we absolutely should not nerf Q damage. We should not nerf PvP damage. We should nerf him, right? He's on the strong side. Yeah, when I like asked him talking about this, but he's like, we really should not nerf his PvP damage. You know, do not go back in the Q change. Do not do that stuff. Base AD is a very potent jungle lever, because more than any other class in the game, junglers really use base AD for clear speed. And so if you want a way to nerf a champion to make them less powerful, make them less omnipresent, it's like you slow down their clear, you slow down their gold and XP income because they're going to clear a little more slowly. The core way that you clear on Khazix, especially on camps like, I mean, it's mostly in camps like Wolves, Raptors, and Krugs, you don't really get much of a chance to, is you kill off the small wolves as fast as possible. You use Qs and autos in small wolves to isolate the big wolf, and then the big wolf dies a lot faster. That's way faster than like letting your jungle pet tick do a bit more damage because hitting the small wolves. That's never important enough. So like -3 AD, like this might take you an extra auto attack to isolate the big wolf, or maybe 2 extra auto attacks to isolate the big wolf. Which is like a very large time loss because you're missing several double damage Qs as a result, right? This can suddenly have really big breakpoint effects. You know, giving Akali 10 damage on Q was over 1% win rate on the champion. Giving Kha'Zix 3 less AD is probably over 1% less win rate here as well. Sometimes PvP damage is going to be less, right? Kha'Zix will auto attack some. And his clear speed will be slower. He will be slower to fighting Scuttle. He will be less healthy when he goes to gank bot lane. This will be some win rate. Here's some math. Here is Kha'Zix's base AD without items. Here is his base AD, well, his total AD accounting for an expectation of items and runes and whatnot. This is like assuming he goes entirely full available at level 18. So yeah, 3 less AD doesn't matter much for level 18 Kha'Zix, but certainly means quite a bit for his first couple of clears, right? So changes the Kha'Zix. Next is Kogmaw. I don't think Kogmaw really had to be changed, but this was on Thursday, I believe. We're like reacting to like day one data functionally from the patch. And I'm chatting with a designer who was given like 80 carries as his task. And I'm like, okay, listen. So I gave him my conjecture, and he just ultimately agreed. And so what I told him was like, okay, look, so we're in a world right now where player perception is that 80 carries are overpowered. And I know there are ADCs who need help and need buffs. But I strongly believe that for every champ you want to buff, you should find a champ you want to nerf. I challenge you to have an equal number of 80 carries buffed and nerfed on this patch, in terms of your identification. And it's like, for every Ashe we need a Kog'Maw, for every Sivir we need, someone else to go down. For every Sivir we need a Zeri. And it's like, I know, like, you don't want to nerf Aphelios when we're nerfing Overheal and we just nerfed Gale Force and we're nerfing it again and we just nerfed, Stormrazor. And the thing is, like, we nerfed Stormrazor in 13.11, and like, we didn't have any 13.11 pro data by the time we did this, right? We can never react to the prior pro patch. As context, right? When we're locking this patch down, okay, we just barely had 1 week of LPL games. So when we locked this patch down, we had the first week of LPL games, and I actually looked at this last night or the night before. So there were 43 games of LPL. By the time we had to lock this patch, Yuumi had 5 bans and 3 picks. And like, you can't guarantee that bans are like real presence, because it's just one team saying, oh, you might pick Yuumi. You might pick Yuumi because we think you'll play her, and we think you think she's strong, and we think she's strong enough that if you think she's strong, we'll go for it. But picks is someone actually saying, no, this champion is strong, right? So like, bans will pretty heavily inflate the presence of a champion, and picks are like honest in that sense, right? So for example, there's champions like Jax right now, where Jax's presence is held up by like a really high ban rate and a really low pick rate. Like, I think Jax is like something like 26 bans and like 8 picks on like the most recent patch, and it's like, is that even real presence? Like, because he's like 30% present in top lane, right? So like, in the Yuumi case, we had 1 week of LPL, and we're like, yeah, that's enough. That 25% pro presence, that's enough to be like, we should act. We should be scared. So anyway, right. So with Kog'Maw, right, we don't really have very much pro data. We don't really know for sure where the champions are lining up. In the case of Aphelios, we again literally cannot know what pros are doing with 13.11 Aphelios. We literally don't have the information. They've only just started now, and it's well past the patch lock for this patch. And so he's like, no, I don't want to nerf Aphelios. But cool, that's your call. You're a designer. You're a smart guy. But again, horse trading like a champ buff for a champ nerf. Kog'Maw, high win rate champion, is like pretty much the one. It's like he's like the 180 carry who really came away with like really happy with Rageblade, like outsized happy with Rageblade, where he really liked the Hybrid Pen passive, and that like gave him a ton of power. Where he didn't really have a mythic that he liked before, and now he has an item that is like appropriately mythic that he's like happy about, and he's chilling with that one, right? Whereas everyone else mostly side graded. He actually got an upgrade in his core build, and so Kog'Maw's of course quite happy. Anyway, yes, he's obviously doing very well. And so the simple nerf, I'm very glad we kept the buffs to Q and E and whatnot, where the usability is up on his spells. This champion is not just an auto attacker, but he has something else going on in the kit, right? He's not just the W cannon. And so pretty simple change, right? 0.5% max health in W. It's not a huge deal, but it's obviously there. So here's the math on the changes here. So this is Kog'Maw's auto attack damage versus a relatively squishy target. 600 to 2300 is a relatively squishy target by level 18. And then a much healthier one. This is, a moderately melee champion with like a Doran shield, 4200 max HP is like solidly a fighter with a full build, or a tank who's typically doing more armor stacking than health stacking. And so this is no items on Kog'Maw, just simply the throughput on his damage before and after. Of course, the nerf is slightly bigger for tankier targets, but you can see if we don't account for items coming in, which of course would happen in the real world, but I just chose not to here. The baseline DPS of the champion is down 4 to 5%. Next is Lucian. I think there's a really good set of changes here. This was cooking for kind of a while. The reason this passive existed at all, by the way, was a way to try to get Lucian out of mid lane. So this was a time where Lucian mid, even in high MMR, was like a 44% win rate champion, and in bot lane he was like 47% in most like skill brackets, and he was like, I forget the numbers to be honest, like 60% or 80% or something relatively high pick ban and pro play. And it's like, wow, we could totally buff this champion for all the Lucian players if we just got him out of mid, right? If we weren't beholden to Lucian mid crushing his win rate, we could just like let Lucian be like a 49% win rate bot laner, and Lucian players are probably going to be happier with a 49% Lucian the moment that we have to nerf at 47. I wasn't part of the team then, but like that's my understanding of what was going on there. I think it was a relatively noble goal. The difficulty with that is, of course, it made Lucian feel like he was really, really tethered to having a teammate nearby. He's really tethered to having, especially an enchanter, because if you buff him, if you heal him, if you shield him, you give him this. And at the time, there were almost no enchanters in pro play. My recollection, anyway, I know obviously Lucian Nami like became a big thing, but like this was a time where it's like, oh, there's lots of enchanters in solo queue, right? There's lots of Jannas and Sonas in solo queue, but there's lots of like Nautiluses and Leonas and stuff in pro play. So we can give him a lot of solo queue power, especially low elo solo queue power. It's like even more enchanter heavy, which is like a thing that Lucian like could use because he's a really high elo skewed champion. It's like, wow, we can give him a lot of low elo skewed power. We can give him some dual lane power. We can raise the fuck out of his win rate. And get him out of mid because we can like lower his base AD and lower spell damage, but give him damage to the passive. And like it worked, right? It got Lucian to a much stronger place for bot lane. It did quite a bit for elo skew. It got him out of mid lane. It got his win rate higher. It's like cool stuff. That said, we can obviously walk this back a little bit, right? Like lowering the power here I think is valuable in terms of saying, hey, Lucian, less of your power budget is tied up in having a teammate nearby. And by changing the condition from any empowerment to only heals and shields, but also nearby enemy getting CC'd, we can say, oh, okay, it doesn't matter if Nami is buffing me or if Sona's buffing me. It's like, there's a team fight and our Ornn ulted. That pops your passive. And of course, yes, you can press W, and if people auto, he gets the W through the passive because he gets buffed by the move speed and whatnot. Like, I think the W is still there. My understanding is his W still counts. That's like hard coded in. Because I remember playtesting this Lucian change, and I debuted red buff, and we just like fought red buff, and I had stacks for the entire fight. So as far as I could tell, even though it's not like technically the patch note here, the W definitely was giving me this as someone who plays the changes personally. So yeah, I think this is a very, very good change, right? So less of his power is in the passive, just overall. His lane assignments get quite softened, which is good. I think this probably still counts as Lucian nerf, right? Like, Lucian has basically played mostly with Lucian Nami and Lucian Yuumi, and those champions pretty reliably always buff him. Like, to be fair, like Yuumi Q, I think counts as a buff, and Yuumi Q will no longer give him, well, if it heals via her passive, it'll count as a heal, and then he gets the buff anyway. But like Yuumi Q giving him on hit damage, that's not going to count. Yuumi E, the shield, that's still going to count. It's still a shield and an ally. But it's like now if you play with Leona, E plus Q both count as stuns. Lucian Leona just gave him 4 shots of his passive, right? E double attack, all 4 shots going to get damage here. From Leona, he doesn't have to land W. Like, there's a lot of power in Lucian Leona, Lucian Thresh, Lucian Blitzcrank, Lucian Nautilus, all these things, right? They pretty much all have 2 hard CCs, and Lucian's going to get 4 empowered shots with that. That's going to be really, really powerful, right? But yeah, Lucian Nami, it's like if she presses E, she runs Aerie, by the way. So if Nami presses E first, that was a shield. If she presses W, that's a heal. Still 2 buffs, right? So that's not getting any better. It's getting worse via the damage. But anyway, love these changes. I think these are really good changes. Really, really cool stuff here. I'm glad this is happening to Lucian. So here's the math in terms of, here's the base damage of the passive if you get no items at all. That's obviously pretty fraudulent. Here's the damage when you actually build a bunch of items. And yeah, it's down a very similar 25% less damage. This thing does 25% less damage, which is pretty reasonable to me. And it's just going to be up more, which is fine. He's less enchanter bound, which is really, really good stuff. Really, really happy with this. I think it's really cool. So Lulu, as I said, I was tasked with identifying jungle and support for this patch. And so I was like, okay, what I saw is outside of Melio and Yuumi showing up in the pro meta, which again, they very clearly have. Melio's almost 100% pick ban, and Yuumi, she was like 25% week 1 of the LPL, but she's trending towards 85%, right? Like she's 100% LCK, but she's not 100% in LPL. So it's like roughly 85% in pro. I think if you average it out, I haven't like Gigaspot checked, but like she's not actually 100 because again, the LPL is not playing her 100% of the time, right? Either way, the support meta is basically the exact same as MSI, which I liked, by the way. So my goal for the MSI meta was 2-to-1 melee supports. And across the, across of MSI, the picks was something like 93 melee champions, asterisk, I'm counting Rakan melee, and 54 ranged. So it was really, really close 2-1, which was the goal. I wanted 2-1 melee to ranged. I'm counting Thresh and Rakan as melee champions, which I think they functionally play as, and so I think that's a fair call. And I think 2-1 melee to range is still a good goal. I think that is the right level of variation, where there are some enchanters you get to see it once in a while. If you want to play hyper carry, you can, but that is a spice that is right. It's in 1/3 of games, so it's 1/3 of picks rather, right? So it's in. There is an enchanter in about half of the games. There's 2 enchanters in 1/8 of them, and then most of the games are double tank, right? I think that's like pretty fair. I think it's pretty reasonable. Anyway. This is to say, Lulu and Rakan have a pretty similar presence to before, and the stack rank below of like, where's Alistar, where's Thresh, where's Nautilus, where's the other champions, like that tier list is the same as what was at MSI. But what's changed is Melio's 100% pick ban, and because Melio's in there, we're actually now more enchanter skewed, and so Yuumi gets to show up a lot, because if you're an enchanter meta, Yuumi's really good into enchanters. And so I was like, okay, we need to nerf Lulu. We absolutely must nerf Melio. We should really nerf Lulu for staleness. She's been in pro play for the entire year, and she's really stale, and we really need to get enough movement to get back to 2-1 melee champions. And we might want to consider nerfing Yuumi, because if she's the 3rd enchanter in line, and we kick out Melio and Lulu, we just get Yuumi presence. So we should really consider this, but I was like, I'm not super hard on this one. I'm not like hardlining Yuumi. Through discussion, we chose we were going to nerf Yuumi. We can talk about that more later. But anyway, the goal here was like, dude, like Melio is like a 52% win rate champion. He can just lose to 2.5% win rate just for free, right? We can nerf him to 50, and that's fine. He's allowed to be a balanced enchanter. But obviously it's 100% presence in pro, so like we should really swing for at least a 2% nerf on this patch. Like, kick him down a notch, try to get him from 100% to like 50%, maybe lower. Again, we want 2-1 melee to ranged. And of course we can't react to what pros are doing for 13-12 until 13-14, but we'll measure win rate mags and see what we got. And I'm not talking about Lulu yet, but it's like, and also we don't do Lulu. And Lulu is a 47% win rate champion in solo queue across MMR. Like, it's pretty flat, actually. So I don't really want to lower Lulu's win rate. I really don't want to. Like, Lulu doesn't deserve to be below 47, but I would like if we could punt her a little bit out of pro play. And so I tried to go for changes that were a little bit pro play skewed, and give her buffs that would be solid for solo queue. And so I tried to maintain win rate. There's a chance I missed. The more important thing is lowering her in pro, which I believe this does. And she was already like, she's like the number 3 or 4 champion, if I recall correctly. So like, it's not ultra dire, but again, trying to nerf her, right? So 3 armor, generally speaking, it was 3 armor and 6 on hit damage, right? I think these are really, really good pro skewed balance levers. Early trading has usually been a very strong thing. So if you look at the enchanters that get played, right? The enchanters that get played in pro play are champions like Lulu, who are actually among the more durable enchanters. We used to see a lot of Karma. Karma is the most durable enchanter. And we never see champions like Janna and Sona, who are the most frail enchanters. And so, generally speaking, level 1 to like level 3 durability on enchanters tends to be a really pro-sensitive lever. I remember years back, the team changed Jinx's base health, and it gave her they increased her base health by a lot, and it gave her very little solo queue win rate. Like, it gave her some, but it skyrocketed her pro play presence. Bot lane tends to be pretty sensitive to level 1 trading patterns. And so it's why I chose 3 armor, and it's why I chose 6 on hit damage. Yes, sometimes these damage gets blocked by minions, I understand that, but generally I think this is a pretty reasonable thing to do. And so these are the nerfs, and then I said, okay, well, compensation buff. There's actually some undercurrent of W max Lulu being stronger than E max Lulu. I think any enchanter who all they do is make the AD carry do more damage, I think that is too passive of a play style. And it's like, if all you're doing is whimsying the Aphelios on cooldown, I think that is not really what we want out of the champion. AD carries already scale multiplicatively really, really hard. Giving them even more aggressive multipliers is something we're trying to shy away from if we can right now. And so it's like, well, let's try to enforce Emax, which to be fair is the more common solo queue build anyway. So most Lulus will get buffed by this change. Anyway, let's talk about the numbers. and what they mean for the champion right now. So here is Lulu's armor before and after. Here's what it means for overall physical durability. It's, again, not, the biggest change ever, but it is a tap down, 2.3% less durability at level 1. Right, clearly able to trade back against her. This is the overall total auto attack damage of Lulu herself when attacking, and, it's down 6 damage via picks, which is, hey, guess what? That's like 10% less damage at level 1. So if Lulu fights your whoever, right? If she fights your Milo, she fights your Annie, she fights your Leona, well, she dies 2% faster, and she does 10% less damage back to you when trying to trade back, right? To when trying to say, okay, well, you Leona Eid, and we pop Sunlight, and I'm going to auto-attack you as you walk away, on under Glacial or under Aftershock or whatever. It's like, well, she's doing 10% less damage to you on this hit, on each hit, right? Which is like, that's going to be meaningful. It's going to lower her trading overall. So, yeah, in general, in solo queue, level 1, for most people at least, level 1 trading doesn't mean very much. And so we can kind of get this, and it doesn't hurt her as much for non-pro players. And again, I'm trying to preserve win rate, so here's Help Pix's power going up on the shield. This is the base value of the shield itself. This is accounting for her doing a full item build, counting for AP, counting for heal and shield power. If she has a full item build at level 18, which again is pretty fraudulent, but this is what it trends toward, here's how much shielding she has before and after, which is, still a pretty solid amount of extra shielding. So yeah, her shielding is up, 7 to 9%. Her durability is down 2%. Auto attack damage is down, 10 to 3%. Depending on how much you care about durability, depending on how much you cared about auto attack damage, depending on how much you cared about shielding, this could very easily be win rate neutral on Lulu, or win rate or negative or positive based on how much you do each one. Right? That's the hope. Again, the hope is less presence in pro play. Melio gets nerfed. This champion, we probably could have gone really hard for exactly only pro skewed nerfs, but I essentially tried to align Melio's base stats with other enchanters and try to not have him break new ground. So it's like lowering his armor to 26, which is the number that Lulu has. 4.6 armor growth is something that is shared by several other enchanters. So it's like, okay, you have less durability. This will tend to late skew a bit on the durability loss, but overall, less durable. I think it's totally reasonable. And again, less hyper carry power, right? It's like, hey, look, your early trades are going to be decent. And honestly, maybe the right choice was this should have been 10 to 20% or something, right? And it like still scales a bit. And we nerf his early game even more. But essentially, what I'm trying to do, and this has been like an undercurrent of changes over the last several months, is try to lower as many systemic multiplicative AD carry things as possible, because pros are going to min-max, right? Pros are going to use Melio and ensure the buffs are always in the AD carry and always give this Aphelios or this Jinx or whatever as much of these buffs as possible, and it's going to multiply based on how well they farm, it's going to multiply based on how many items they have, it's going to multiply based on all the XP they get, because when they level and they get 3 more attack damage, they get more damage here, and it's like, and they buy an Ardent Sensor, it gives them even more attack speed and even more on hit damage, it's going to multiply their other attack speed, and the attack speed multiplies all the damage and the crit, and like, there are so many systemic ways to further multiply what AD carries already do, that it doesn't leave any room for the AD carries to be powerful on their own. So my belief, and you might disagree, my belief is that marksmen are not intrinsically overpowered. They are clearly strong, but they are not intrinsically overpowered. The evidence for this is the fact that we still see Swain and Vhagar and Karthus have high win rates in bot lane. These haven't, for the most part, moved. We do not see marksmen take over other lanes. I mean, we see Kindred, who's using Trinity Force, but that was a non-crit item that got buffed. Kindred's obviously quite strong, but we don't see Vayne overtaking top. We don't see Quinn overtaking top. We don't see Tristana overtaking mid. We see her a little bit, but like Tristana mid's been in another meta for years at this point, and you get the one game out of 15. That's been around forever. Like, that's not new, really. So it's like, okay, there's no external indications that AD carries actually got intrinsically stronger, but the systems around them got a lot stronger, right? Oh, we're in a really tank-heavy metagame in the top lane right now. The top 3 picked champions in pro play right now, in order, top 3 in no particular order, is Kante, Sion, and Gragas. And yeah, it's AP Gragas, but like the guy is melee and quite tanky. And I think number 4 is Jax, but like Malphite has like a 15 or 20% pro presence, and Ornn is like 15 to 10% as well. And it's like, yeah, there is some Gwen, there is some Jax, right? There are some damage champs out there, but it's like, there was some Ken, especially MSI, but it's like, oh, top lane is really tank heavy right now. Cassandra gets flexed into mid. A lot of the junglers like Vi go Radiant Virtue second and build kind of tank, and it's like, well, we're in an ecosystem that really wants you to play an AD carry to kill these guys. We're in a spot where the pro meta doesn't have Azir, Victor, or Ryze in it, so who's doing consistent damage? The AD carry. We're in a pro meta where the mid laners are frequently buying Everfrost. They're buying a low damage mythic. So who's going to kill the K'Sante? It's not Everfrost Ahri. It's never Everfrost Ahri who's killing that, right? And so it's like everything around this system is saying, well, it's got to be about the AD carries, right? Why would I gank top? Why would I gank Sion when I can gank Zeri? And meanwhile, it's like, yeah, we're playing Milio, who has a percent total AD of my ally scaling. It's like, well, guess what? You're going to really, really care about how much AD your ally has when Milio is the highest sought after AD, the highest sought after support in the game, right? And it's like, and Lulu, right? Her W gives someone attack speed and damage on hit, which is like, oh, well, we really, really care about how much your AD carry auto attacks because Ahri's not going to use this, right? Ahri's not going to use Whimsy's buff. She already has her own dash. She doesn't care about attack speed. And it's like, so if your metagame is let's buff the AD carries, and there's a little bit of chicken egg thing here, right? It's like they might be doing this because people really believe AD carry is overpowered. And I'm not saying people don't believe that AD carry is overpowered, but again, by every measurement I can see, the metagame is self-reinforcing. And even at MSI, again, we had 2-to-1 range champions or 2-to-1 melee champions. It was actually Lucian who was permabanned. Like the actual number 1 AD carry was Lucian, and then it was Aphelios Jinx. And then Zeri was 4th. Lucian was permabanned by all the top teams. It's like, okay, well, actually, it's not a hypercarry meta. It's actually a lane bully meta, except there was no second place to Lucian, right? Caitlyn wasn't viable anymore, and Kless hasn't been viable in a year. So it's like, okay, well, we can do that at some point. But anyway, that is the belief. So it's like, okay, well, if we can reduce the number of AD carry multiplicative factors, the AD carries can have their own power budget, and you can't funnel them as hard. You're not able to do it anymore. It doesn't matter. It's not about them anymore. So that to me is like I'm trying to go in that direction. That's why I nerfed this. And I want to point out, like, this passive already scales via the fact that champions get more AD as they level. Also, the flat burn scales on its own. It scales from like, I want to say like 25 to 80 on its own, and that's before Milio's ability power is compensated for. So like, there's plenty of parts of the passive that already scale on their own. This doesn't need to super scale with the AD carry itself. This already essentially scales with the AD carry itself. AD carries have like 8 times the attack damage at level 18. They do at level 2. So anyway, that's the explanation of all these changes here. Looking for win rate nerfs to Milio. Looking for fewer ways to just giga buff an AD carry and try to systemically move things away from multiplying other AD carries. Because that to me is a good way of making the meta less about bot lane without having to keep nerfing AD carries as champions. Because I don't think they strictly need it. I think the meta game, the game around them, is pretty skewed, and that is something I definitely want to try to keep fixing, and that's what I'm trying to do. So as I flashbang you, here is Milio's armor before and after. Scales down to 104 instead of 111. Here's overall physical durability as a result of this one. Again, he is a little bit more all-inable. 1.6% less durability in the early game. For level 6 all-in, it's 2.2% less durability. I mean, you're going to kind of stop around here as like the end of the game for you, but still, 2.7, 2.8% less durable. Here is how much total pop damage the passive deals. As we can see, again, a full build Lucian has 5 times the attack damage at level 18. He does at level 1. And so instead of this passive, more than 10xing its value or 11xing its value, it only 5x its value, which is pretty reasonable for a passive overall, I'm pretty sure. So to me, this is pretty reasonable. Scaling is totally acceptable. Again, there is still a 20 to 80 burn damage on this. So the damage is now just always more about the burn than the pop, which to me is totally fine. I think that's pretty reasonable overall. So that's the Milio nerf. Basically, again, the target is 2 to 2.5% win rate. So if this patch comes out and Milio loses like 1 or like 1.5%, we'll just nerf again in 13.13. Like the goal is to get Milio to 50% in solo queue and hope that is enough movement to move the needle the right amount in pro play. So we're gonna have to, for 13.13, we're gonna have to actually use solo queue as the measurement of pro play, which is, again, we're hoping it's going to be accurate enough, right? So next is Nasus. Nasus identified as a top laner that was not doing terribly well. It's a champion who, is pretty low elo skewed. And it's like, this is kind of champion where it's like, he should be able to do well somewhere. So 2% lifesteal for some sustain, 0, 20, 40 seconds off the ult cooldown. I think pretty fun stuff here as well. So here's how much lifesteal our boy Nasus has. Of course, a larger percentage increase in the early game, though in terms of total health earned, obviously much more in the late game. Here is the cooldown of his R. This is accounting for his expected full item build. Cooldown boots, the Frozen Heart, the Divine Center, all that. What is his cooldown supposed to actually be, accounting for real items. The same at rank 1. And down from a 62 to a 41-second cooldown on full build at level 18 is definitely a pretty meaningful decrease in the ult cooldown. I think pretty cool stuff here. I mean, he's going to have this up really, really constantly. And yes, I know this might be really terrifying that you have a 40-second cooldown Nasus ultimate. I don't know, I think it's kind of cool, personally. Anyway, let's move on. Orianna gets another buff. I saw some Reddit comments, people being like, XD, why are you making our champions burstier? I actually think it's correct for mages to be bursty. So I think it depends on the champion. But I really do think it's very valuable that different classes have different strengths and weaknesses. And that someone like Orianna or Syndra should work much differently from someone like maybe Victor or Azir or Ryze or Cassiopeia, who are clearly much more of DPS mages. And you have champions like Orianna, who is like very clearly more of a burst mage. Like Shockwave is just like her coolest ability. It's got counterplay. You can flash out of it. You're paying attention. You can spell shield it. You can black shield. You can Zonias. Like Orianna R is like the only spell in her kit with actual gameplay attached. This is not to say that Orianna is a badly designed champion. It just means that like this is the fairest ability on her kit by far. And sick Orianna ults are so when the durability update happened, right, in the middle of last year, about a year ago today, the call I made in the patch rundown was that AD carry is going to get buffed because who's going to kill the long health bars? And mage is going to get nerfed because they were going to run out of mana, and a lot of them are burst champions, and if you can't one combo somebody, what does your champion do? Both those things ended up being true, right? We quickly, and it didn't happen by worlds, right? Like we weren't really in AD carry meta by worlds. The world finals was won by the worst AD carry by kind of a lot. The better AD carry definitely lost worlds. The better jungler and better AD carry definitely lost worlds. The better mid laner won worlds. But it was also playing, and it was, to be fair, playing a fair bit of mages, right? So, maybe this is a little bit fraudulent, but regardless, any burst mage, I think, really needs to get a spot where their burst matters again. And when champions gained a bunch of flat MR, that really, really hurt flat pen builds, so Shadow Flame, Sork Shoes, Ludens. And they gained a bunch of health growth, which also helps them get out of the, R viability, right? They're out of the R combo range. So I think Orianna is one of the best examples of a champion who we should have been buffing her ultimate. I think this is, the best thing to buff. If you're only to pick one thing, it's probably the best thing to buff of Orianna in terms of creating a satisfying character who does cool things and keeps up with the game. So anyway, here's the math on Orianna ult before and after. Here's the base damage before and after. 14, then 22% more damage. And then we do it counting for ability power, and it's very, very similar stuff. The AP ratio buff is pretty small, all things considered. But yeah, you get 1,000 damage shockwave now finally. And yeah, cool beans, right? This is a solid amount of increased damage in Orianna, and now her burst is going to matter a bit more, and I think that's a very good thing. So Rell, as I mentioned in the intro, I was very late into the process, the Summoner's Rift team consult for Rell, and so a lot of the changes that were in her micro patch and changes in this patch itself, I had a very direct hand in. Some of the stuff was the original designers stuff, and some of this was coming from me. We'll kind of break that out as it happens. So of course, a pretty nice change here, changing her adaptive 4 stat from attack damage to ability power. Right now, I think it's largely people realize that her adaptive stat is attack damage, but Rell jungles on this patch very quickly realized they should be running cooldown as their primary stat shard and just running armor as a secondary and tertiary, because there's no point in running adaptive because you can't get AP on this champion for a long time. Yeah, you might go demonic at some point, but until you take your first recall for a Darksteel or something, you can't get the AP up. You can't convert your stat over, and bonus AD is just not a very good stat for her. This doesn't change very much because you're going to still not make this change, but it is good that it's there. In case you do have to run the stat shard, it's a better stat shard for you. Okay. The thing that matters, though, is this was step 1, which was, hey, let's speed the Q back up, get the cast time back down to 0.4 seconds. Big Fields, I think, is a very, very good choice. But what we saw as the micro patch hit, we're measuring win rate every single day. So there's a report that's like, okay, here's the calendar date, here's her win rate. Here's her calendar date, here's the win rate. Here's the calendar date, here's the win rate. And it's like, okay, she's 52% at support. And she was 52% at jungle when we were measuring it. And we're putting the chases together, and it's, we're getting it together on Thursday, we're getting it together on Friday, we meet again on Monday. Or it's well, we did the micro patch on late Thursday, so we get a little bit of data on Friday, we get data over the weekend, and then on Monday we meet up and it's okay, how did it go? Okay, we should slot more changes for the patch for 13.12, right? Because our goal is to get her around 51% support. Let her soak at relatively strong, not overpowered, but just relatively strong, so that people can enjoy, getting into the champion and, feeling it out. And yeah, okay, this was a good mid-scope, was a good rework. I really think, so I said this before as in the design team, I still believe it now. I think we should actually intentionally ship new champions and reworks slightly overtuned. I believe that. Because players are going to be bad at the champion when they first try it. and having some level of success relatively quickly is really important for being like, oh, I actually enjoy this. And if that means we always nerf after the first 2 weeks, I personally think that is correct for League of Legends, that the new champion is slightly strong, and if you put the time in and learn this champion before everyone else does, you are rewarded by being an early adopter. I believe that is good for League of Legends, personally. I believe that. You may disagree, and that is fine, but I believe that to be true. I think this is a really big deal for landing mid-scopes, for landing champion updates, that people can find success early on. Like, yeah, I enjoy this champion is strong. This champion feels satisfying, the things I do are winning, and they're obviously not 30 games in the champion yet, but it can be balanced around the 5th game, right? Whereas other champions are balanced around, like, at 20th game or 15 games experience, this champion can be balanced around 5 games experience. I think that is a reasonable thing to do, right? Because people don't have 5 games experience when the champion launches. Anyway, as data came in, we realized on Monday that Rell seemed to be 2% OP at support and about 2% OP at jungle. And our goals were, again, like 50.5, 51% at support and slightly weaker in jungle than at support, but still viable. That we didn't want jungle to be her best role, but a viable secondary role, right? So like 49 to 50 is like very reasonable for like this champion is viable, right? And if you take to her, you can clearly, with champion mastery, rise above the generic win rate, right? No problem at all. And so when we had the data, jungle was performing at or above support. After patch lock, we discovered that jungle started to dip, and jungle was actually more like 50.5, turning towards 50%, but was like clearly under support in win rate. So it could have been variance. And the flip the coin heads more often than tails, because Rell jungle is not that popular and measuring by days. There's only so many only so many games in a day. But that's kind of what we saw. So it's like, ooh, we probably didn't have to nerf jungle as much as we thought we had to, but it was too late to make any further changes. So there's a good chance that Rell is going to be like a 48 jungler in this patch and probably 50.5 at support. That's the goal at this point. Again, the data suggested we should nerf jungle by 2%, and then after it's too late, we realized we don't have to. So our bad. Although we used the information we had as well as we could have, and I think we made the right choice with the information we had. Either way, so Q is faster, but there are nerfs to Rell. Okay, so it's 10 damage down on Q. Q monster mod is now flat instead of percentage. I think this is very wise. W, minus 10 damage on W. Jungle monster damage is flat instead of a percent monster mod. W mount up damage is flat instead of a W monster mod, percent monster mod. E damage goes down pretty meaningfully. This is where we took out most of the power functionally. And then again, going for something flat instead of stuff here. And then say, hey, by the way, the full tilt pop is actually capped against monsters. And then after you go through all the numbers, I'll tell more about some of the goals here, right? So, okay, Rell maxes Q last most commonly in both. Actually, so her most common build in both support and jungle is W, then E, then Q. So Q max last, minus 10 damage. You feel that here. With the monster mod the way it is, I guess you're losing out on the ability power ratio no longer being higher because it's supposed to 0.6 instead of 1.8. But functionally, this doesn't matter. Rell jungle is rarely level 14 for any part that matters in the game. So, 10 less PvP damage, no change in the jungle. But of course, Rell jungle hits champions. And so a lot of this so this was my synopsis. This is what I remember telling was, okay, we're trying to nerf Rell, right? So okay, let's start with Rell support. We're going to do this buff, right? And this buff is like 0.5% win rate. Okay, so we need to ship 2.5% or 1.5% of nerfs to Rell to compensate for this change plus her current resting win rate. So 10 damage plus 10 damage plus 10 to 30 damage and 1% max health. That probably, right, and this is what we max second. So it's right, 30 damage until level 8, then it's 35 and eventually 50 less damage on a full combo. And 1% max health, which is like, 15 to 20 damage, right? Like 1,500 to 2,000 max health is like a pretty reasonable target in a lot of cases. So, okay, up to 70 less damage in a full combo, whatever, right? Like this isn't huge. And it's like, yeah, that's probably 1.5, 2% win rate on support Rell. Okay, now let's talk about jungle. Because if we lower the PvP damage of jungle Rell, that's going to be less powerful. That's going to be less because more of what Rell does is clear camps or just set up ganks in general. Like when Rell ganks for a Renekton, does Rell's damage matter or does Renekton get the kill anyway? Whereas if Rell is 2v2ing with Ashe, Rell is a meaningful part of the damage output there, right? Like Renekton is higher level than Rell. Ashe is the same level as Rell. Renekton's spells do 400 damage each. Ashe has volley, right? The amount that Rell's damage matters when ganking top is much lower than the amount of damage that Rell needs when playing in bot lane. And when she's ganking bot lane as a support, Khazix and Ashe have plenty of damage. But that's, again, less common than just fighting there. So, ultimately, and if it's like Rell is jungle and Rell getting spot lane, it's like, well, Ashe and Leona are both dealing damage, and you're there. You're participating, right? Your damage is less important than the E speed, than the W stun, than the Q spun, that kind of stuff. So the PvP damage here is going to nerf jungle Rell less. That was my read. And so it's like, well, we need to make sure that if we're shipping 3% of jungle nerfs, we need another 1.5% of win rate in jungle clear speed. Like, we need to get that out of something, right? We need to ship another 1.5% that is jungle specific to then hit the jungle target, right? And it was like, we're going to do the support nerfs, that's the most important thing. Okay, now that we've got these changes, here's what I think the numbers are going to be. Let's do some more so we hit the jungle target that we want. And the jungle target was, again, like 2.5%, 3%. And so, okay, well, this doesn't matter. That's fine. Okay, well, W. Okay, well, W does meaningfully less damage. This is a very, very meaningful clear speed nerf, right? This is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting here. Now, to keep in mind, crash down has a functional, like, 30-second cooldown, because you have to crash down, then you mount up, then you wait, then you crash down again. Like, this is very, very low repeatability, but it is there. It does exist, and it does less damage. And you max it first, so, by level 9, you have really this much less damage of the spell. But again, it's really, really low repeatability, but it's still 170 less damage. And then, of course, the E. Right, here's the damage before, here's the damage after. There is a bit here where you get more because the monster mod is so much better by giving it flat damage than the percent amp. Of course, if you're hitting something like Baron, the fact that the damage is capped, and I want to point out, by the way, that 3% max health capped at 150 is 3,000 max health, right? No, sorry, 5,000 max health. That's basically only Dragon and Baron. So it's capped against Dragon and Baron at 150. Fine. So it's 65 plus 280 plus 150 is the math here. And that's how good her E smite is. So one of the things that I suggested that happens in this changes, by the way, was to try to not have every spell here deal an absurd amount of monster damage in the jungle. Now the tough thing here is, and I think this is the designer's choice, and I think it's actually a wise choice, is he's like, okay, so he's like, I tuned the numbers using Nunu as an example, where it's like, yeah, you know what? Rell's gonna have a smite spell, right? In that, like, Nunu has consumed, it's really strong. Cho'Gath has feast, it's really, really strong. It's an ultimate, to be fair. He's like, yeah, I want Rell to have a functional smite spell. And he's like, to me, that smite is EQ, right? I charge the E, I get the damage, and I Q, and, level 14, I do 320 plus, 396, like, bam. And actually it would be even higher in the case of Baron, because it's going to be, the percent health is going to be like 150 instead of like 60 here. So add another like 70 damage here, right? It's like that's her smite, right? Like I want those to be good. I'm like, okay, cool, that makes sense. I would urge you to not have it be every other spell as well. This is why W got hit so hard. Because then it's like, okay, here are the spells that I'm actually going to preserve for the smite hit, like for the combo. He's like, I want to preserve that. The difficult thing, of course, is that W max is what jungle Rell does most commonly. It might be that she moves to E max now as a result of W's clear being hit pretty hard. I think it's totally reasonable. If Rell jungle is E max, it's just jungler. She wants to move fast. She wants to be in for the ganks. That feels reasonable to me. That's what she's going to do. And so she's just the Emax. It's totally reasonable and totally fine. But it's why a lot of damage went off of W, and it's why Q and E were relatively preserved. Was to try to push him towards saying, hey, like, these are your big single target monster damage spells, and move in that direction. And I think it was. I stand by it. I suggested it, right? So some context behind why the changes are what they were. And again, there's a really good chance that in 13-13 we buff Rell jungle a bit and we find the right levers for it. And I think it's going to be fine when we do that. Okay, next up is a big change. As I mentioned, this is one of my projects that I pitched that we do in the first place. I saw it through to completion. We got, we validated everything. Feedback has been generally positive. We are shipping changes to Rumble. So there is, of course, a chance that the power level is off, that he is too strong or too weak in his intended roles. If it's really bad, we can micropatch if he's like, 44% for some reason. But basically, a bunch of really high skilled players on the gameplay analysis team was like, here's what I believe the win rate read to be on these changes. Here's what I think you're getting out of the Q. Here's what I think you're getting out of the W. Here's what I think you're getting out of the E. Here's what I think you're getting out of the R. Here's the base stat changes. Here's how much win rate we think you're giving him in top lane versus jungle versus mid. And amalgamating those together and talking with sort of the point of contact with that team. It's like, okay, the version that I brought up last week in the YouTube video about Rumble, which you can find on my channel if you want to go look at it, with like extra goals and context and whatnot there. If you want to go look at that, you can. But that version was deemed to be about 2% overpowered. If I recall correctly, around 2% overpowered. And so I shipped further nerfs, which was lowering the base health further from what those notes said, and lowering the shield from what those notes were. And then said, okay, well, we're still trying to ship like some level of power positive to bot lane, and so I'm going to stand behind these changes, and I think we're going to ship something good. Okay, what is happening with Rumble, for those who don't know? The goals are to shift Rumble towards being towards his best role being top lane instead of his best role being mid lane. He is an elite skewed champion. He is a mid lane skewed champion. And that means for his most popular role, for the majority of players, he is like a 46% win rate champion because we're constrained by elite mid lane win rate and we can't budge anymore. And I was like, I really, really dislike when people can't be successful on their favorite champion because something that doesn't affect them is affecting them. And they're catching strays. And so I wanted to shift Rumble toward being a top laner and give him kit outputs that would make him a better top laner. I also wanted to just sort of modernize the kit a little bit here. So health changes, these break even at level 7 and 8 is the change here. Level 8 is basically identical. So, 1 through 7 is a nerf, 8 is identical, 9 plus is a buff. In general, actually, top lane is the highest experience lane in the game across all MMRs, actually. Whether you're low MMR or high MMR, top lane is the highest XP role in the game. They get less gold than mid, jungle, and ADC, but they have the most XP. Now, the getting the less gold is primarily a player behavior thing. Like, actually, in low MMR, top laners have more gold than mid laners. But as MMR rises, people seem to funnel AD carries. That funnel tends to come from the top laners, and junglers get a lot more efficient, and so they skyrocket in gold. Junglers are, by the way, the richest class in the game. They have the most gold, actually, even above AD carries, even in like challenger MMRs. Junglers are super rich. A lot of that comes from like the difference in gold income comes purely from PvP combat. Like if you measure like top lane minion gold versus jungle like minion plus monster gold, those are tied pretty much across MMRs, or pretty close to. But junglers obviously are in more combat, and so they have more gold than top laners. And that difference retains as MMR goes up. They get better at clearing, so that gold further increases as well. Anyway, that's a thing, but I want to point that out, by the way. So level scaling actions to be very, very lightly top lane skewed, because top laners are the highest level champions of the game at pretty much any point in time. A little bit of base health regen down. This is, again, trying to be a mid lane focus change where it's more likely that Rumble gets poked and poked and poked a little bit, whereas all lanes are more likely to be a thing in top lane, and so I tried to use the W as a factor for that. Yeah, bitless health regen, bitless base health, and then some health growth is meant to, like, just on a base stat level, slightly skew towards top. It's not going to do a lot of heavy lifting, but it's like, while I'm here, let's shift a little bit, right? Okay, so next are the changes to heat. So I'm a really, really, really big fan of shifting jungle caps to character level scaling, because it gives us really, really clean design levers, right? It was like, oh, Rumble's jungle clear isn't fast enough. Okay, well, 85 becomes 90 on this and on Q, right? Or 65 becomes 90, right? Or, oh, he's actually really OP in the early jungle, especially in elite. It's like, okay, well, this becomes 50 and this becomes 50, right? It's like, and he can still be really good at killing Baron at the end of the game. And I think, by the way, any damage champion, right? Any jungler whose only output is damage, I think they should all be very good at Baron and Dragon, so that like they can use their tempo to use something that is helpful for the team. And so like when your Rumble jungle doesn't gank your lane, but you got the first 2 dragons and Herald and crashed Herald top lane for you, and you got 2 plates. Oh, thanks, Rumble. We're winning because of you. I got ganked by Rek'Sai and that sucked, but like we have 2 dragons and a Herald that I got to cash in on, so I don't feel so bad. Like, I think it's very important the champs who aren't good gankers are good objective control champions. I think that is a good lever, and it's like, look, this is an overt lever right here that I am ready to change if he needs to be better objective control, right? And this way I can also I can divorce late game Baron control and mid game Dragon control from early clear. So I'm a really, really, really big fan of per level scaling on this. I also basically picked numbers that relatively mimicked an example champion, so that the actual damage via your passive relatively mirrors when you're fighting a red buff how much that it gets to Darius, which I think is also a positive. So that's what this cap is. Duration down, attack speed up is actually technically total damage down to the passive, but the feels have been so good on this. So actually, I actually chose the numbers on purpose. So this is exactly 50% more attack speed at level 1, and if you round, exactly 100% more attack speed at level 18, because he has like I think like 31.7% total bonus attack speed or something around there at level 18 via his base stat scaling. And it's like, hey, I don't expect you to build Nash's Tooth. If I wanted you to build Nash's Tooth, I would give you like % more attack speed and let Nash's be sick, but like, not trying that. I don't care. We're not doing that. I don't expect Ashe to ever be a Rumble build. This is not what he's supposed to do. He's not the right kind of champion for it. He's not nearly agile enough for that to work. I don't think. I mean, maybe it happens. I don't know if it does. I don't hate if it happens. Like, that's kind of cool. It gets to be unique. He gets to be a fighter. But I don't think it's ever gonna happen. That's fine. But it's like the feels on this are really, really, really good. The feels are really, really good on this. And then with the duration nerf, it's just like, look, you are silenced for less time. That generally feels good. It's also a bit of a compensation nerf in a sense because with how much more attack speed you get, you don't get a ton more actual damage out of it. The big change that I've overlooked right now is the fact that maximum heat is now 150. And this is, it gives a lot of leeway to Rumble players, but it also gives a lot more room for skill expression. Because basically the only way you can play Rumble right now on live is to sit at 50 heat and like tap W every like 8 seconds in the brush or whatever, to stay at 50 heat. And then when someone comes in and you all in, you just press QWE to the instant cast. One of them is a quarter second cast time from brush. And then you have the next like 3 seconds to press E a second time while you're silenced. And it's like, all I do is mash the button on the keyboard, maybe ult first, and then just like punch you with my passive. And I hope it's enough. And then we're done. And I hope it one-shot you because I have no other fallback pattern. Because I can't cast another button for 5 seconds. And to me, that's a very one note, very, very boring gameplay pattern. The game has gotten more durable over time. And so Rumble can no longer play a mid-range like game where he like tries to space with Electro Harpoon and burn you with Q and like occasionally do it with the ultimate. Because champions are more durable now. Just generally speaking, is just true. Right, durability update happened, and generally speaking, items have gotten more efficient over time, especially durability items, I think. And Rumble just like can't actually play mid games out. It just feels like he can't actually play mid games out. And it's shown by the fact that his primary gameplay pattern is sit in a brush and overheat punch you. Like that's how people actually play the game out. And it's like you have to buy a Magi's and Snowball, or there's no point in playing this champion. Like you're supposed to Dark Seal start, you're supposed to get Magi's like your third item probably, if you can at all. And it's like you better Snowball the lead because you have no late game. And I think that is I don't like that. Like, you know, this isn't a Darius Renekton where it's like, yes, this is very clearly a champion that is a lane bully and he 1v1s you. It's like this champion has to snowball off team fights. And yeah, I think I would like to give this champion more to do. I'd like to give this champion more to do than all or nothing. You must snowball on Magi's, you don't have a late game. And so it's like, okay, what you can do is have a much longer pattern team fight where you don't have to rely on your ultimate. You can sit at 50 heat, but you can now do like 2 or 3 spell rotations before overheating. And you can play a long fight as Danger Zone. And the point here is to be more skill expressive. So if you're a bad Rumble player, you can cast more spells for silencing yourself. And in fact, if you just like mash your keyboard, just get keyboard cat your spells, you will get 2/3 of your spells will be in the Danger Zone, and only 1/3 will be cooled. Which, okay, if you're bad at Rumble, you get kind of more output total. And if you're good at Rumble, you can make the choice, am I going to be a 50 heat Rumble or a 100 heat Rumble? Am I going to go for the overheat one shot, or am I going to go for 2 spell rotations and then play on? And the fact that I can actually cast more spells overall, and the fact that this overheat is less timed, it means that ability haste is less of a bad stat. Where, by the way, like his most common items are things like Night Harvester, whose mythic passive is ability haste, and he buys Zonia's, which has ability haste on it. And I want to say Magi's when you get the 15 stacks has ability haste. I don't remember honestly what the payoff for Magi's is, but it doesn't really matter anyway. But it's like this guy actually gets incidental ability haste anyway. And it's like, hey, this overheat duration on like the default core build means you cannot cast W and then cast W again by the time it's back from cooldown because it's locked out because you're overheated. And it's like, look, this guy gets incidental ability haste. He doesn't even like try, and he has this stuff in his build. Hey, let's maybe like not punish you for the items you already have to buy for your champion to function, right? Like that seems kind of unfair. That seems kind of unreasonable. So yeah, you can play longer fights. You can play in Danger Zone a bit longer, get more done, do more stuff, and like play a real team fight out. And to me, that's like a really big positive and really good for the champion overall. So then we have a bunch of numbers changes, right? So Flame Spitter is getting this is what minus 45 to minus 145 damage off of the Q. It's the same AP ratio, but it's a 6 to 10% target max health bonus damage here. There's of course a monster damage cap on the percent damage. let's talk about that. So here is the rumble. By the way, the attacks per second on the passive, you can see it's basically just always 25% more attack speed functionally. Here's the total number of attacks via the passive as a result, right? Multiplying the attacks per second times the duration. And you can see that, again, it is technically, in the ideal target case, lower throughput. So technically a little bit less Baron damage, except that, the monster cap is higher. Yeah, right here when you're fighting Baron, so it is still better. But anyway, yeah, that exists. But here is oh yeah, so sorry, this is the monster cap stuff. This is how much health does my target have to have before I hit the monster cap, before and after. And then for the Q, here is the monster cap here as well, and you can see the numbers relatively similar early on in the game, and then we trend towards a slightly higher number here, but all's well that ends well. This is the functional target max health for the cap. So things like Gromp, Dragon, Baron, you will run into these, but it means the damage numbers are of course going to be higher. So here is the Rumble Q base damage. This is accounting for no ability power, and keep in mind that the AP ratio on the flat damage is unchanged. So if you have 10 AP, 1000 AP, the flat difference here is unchanged. So this is obviously the base damage before Danger Zone. Danger Zone, of course, multiplies by 1.5 all the damage here. There's no difference there. But this is using an example target. This is using something similar to Rumble. And 700 to about 3000 HP is a pretty reasonable top lane target, especially one who goes things like Death Dance or Maw or Wit's End, where they're not going to get a lot of bonus HP. But you can see it's actually quite a bit of green, right? It's like roughly treading water in the early game, right? Like this is you could argue this is actually a nerf. Like if this is the only change, right? If the only thing we did was like this, you'd think, oh, you nerf Rumble, which is like not inaccurate. But then of course his late game is way better. I mean, you hit like not even that tanky of a target, right? This is not Science, it's not Shogat. This is like, this is not even Nasus, right? Like Nasus ult gives him enough to get above this, right? You look at like Gore Drinker or Stride Breaker on Renekton, it's like almost everyone has more health than this. I mean, not almost everyone, but like a lot of champions have more health than this, right? So it's like, well, although the guys you fight in top lane, the Scions, the Cho'Gaths, the Ornns especially, but even a lot of the fighters, there is a lot of green here. And this is, again, not that egregious of a health total, right? Right. If you're running Overgrowth, bam, right, up it goes. If you run Grasp, if you run a Heartsteel, all that stuff's going to do a lot here. So yeah, there is a lot of green here, right? This is a lot. Now, this does not count ability power, so there's some more flat damage coming through. So the actual percentage gain is not as much higher in the real world, but the base damage is really significantly higher here. Now, of course, there is a minion mod nerf, right? So it's like, hey, look, I really think this is a good change. I think these are all really good things, but hey, this means he's kind of overpowered, right? So where can we ship nerfs that are safe, that are reasonable, that Rumble will generally not miss too much? Right? What is the least feelable ways we can nerf Rumble? And like you will feel it some, but like I'm pretty comfortable with these changes. So here's how much damage you dealt to minions with the Q, again without ability power counting yet, and here's how much you do to a melee minion afterwards. This is a rough approximation because melee minion health scales with minute, and the rate at which the health goes up changes after a certain point. And of course, we're using champion level as the kind of holdover against this. Champion levels do not scale linearly with minutes. But this is a reasonable approximation using the new minion mod and the fact that you have percent health damage here. It's obviously going to be worse against minions. And it is moderately less, but like this is still not a horrible amount of damage, right? Keep in mind, Danger Zone is 1.5x the damage, so you're still doing a pretty solid amount. You still have an ability power ratio here as well. So yes, of course, it is definitely less damage to minions. You definitely have less wave clear. Rumble is going to be worse at wave clear. So if Rumble's primary goal was I'm going to wave clear mid and then go roam bot and ult, that is slower by 25% of the wave clear, and there's an ult cooldown nerf. I am being very overt about the fact that Rumble pushing mid to go roam bot is getting nerfed. Rumble is going to be much worse at bot lane party. This is overt. This is very overt. The two biggest nerfs are to his ability to go play bot lane party. This is intentional. Everything else is a lot of green. This is a lot of green, right? Like, this is a lot of green. This is, I think, overall, some result, probably positive overall as well. Directionally, at least, towards top lane. So, cool. And then here's the quick calculation, right? How much health does my target have to have before my damage is equal? 750 at level 2. Honestly, again, not unreasonable for some champs to have this with things like Doran's Shield. Sure, maybe by level 9, they might not have actually finished a full item yet, but like, I mean, if we take our example, Rumble health of 1553, like, I mean, even the base health is going to be around 1300. This is literally Rumble's base health, by the way. At level 9 is 1300. So it's like, hey, do you have like 112 health at all? Congratulations, you've buffed this ability, right? So like PvP damage, it does not take much to get there. This is a calculation of the AP ratio against minions. It is down, 6 to 8%. Again, wave clear is down somewhat. PvP damage is honestly up in basically all contexts. So next is a change to Scrap Shield. This is more of a light touch. This is just to give him something to feel good about in the mid game. The first version of this was actually a strict buff to the skill. I've since walked this back a fair bit, but here is the Scrap Shield. This is using his very normal skill order. So the most common thing for Rumble is to go for a Dark Shield or a Doran's Ring, plus double Adaptive Force. 662 ability power is right here. This is with Death Cap. Right here is without Death Cap. So at level 18 with Death Cap with full build, this is the 662 ability power. Right before that is like 400-ish. 70 to 450 ability health is 70 is again like the Doran's Ring start right away at the start of the game. This is like not using Overgrowth. This is like not using Adaptive Force, or sorry, the Health Growth Stat Shard. Although people might start going Overgrowth with this champion. But like, you know, and this is basically saying like, okay, at a certain level we grab Hextech Alternator, and then we finish Rocket Belt, and then we grab another Alternator, and then we finish Shadow Flame, and then we build a Void Staff, and then we build a Zonias, and then we like buy 2 NLRs, and then we finish Death Cap, right? This is like, as the items come in, it's green, it's green, it's green, it's green, it's green. Now, if you go Magi's is weaker. If you go Overgrowth, it's strictly stronger. If you run Scaling Health Stat Shard, it's strictly stronger. If you choose to go Demonic Embrace because you really want to kill a Scion, it's clearly stronger. I am very clearly, I'm not trying to make him go Juggernaut. If I wanted to make him go Juggernaut, I would kill the AP ratio off the shield and make the health ratio even higher. That is not the goal. The goal is to say, look, if you make no changes at all, your shield is stronger for the average non-Magi's Rumble. Just like, this is clearly a buff, right? This is very clearly a buff to Rumble. Okay, it's slightly weaker at 3 and 4. This is clearly a buff to Rumble, right? On the items he currently builds on live. If you are to switch out Void Staff for Demonic Embrace, it is much better than before. And so like that's what's happening here, right? Is say, hey, you are allowed to build other things because like, hey, your Q is going to be useful. You can go in this direction a bit. Your W is going to reward you. You can go in this direction a bit. You can get a bit more stuff here. You've got a shield that actually does something. It actually blocks an actual ability in the mid game. There's a little bit of green here. And this was something that I had tapped down when the feedback was like, hey, this is like way over. You need to find like 1.5% of nerfs on this champion. I nerfed the base health from 650 to 625. And I nerfed Scrap Shield from 6% max health to 4% max health, and moved some numbers around to keep the level 1 to 18 relatively similar. Harpoon going to 20. This is not a mandatory change. I think this was a decent change in terms of just slightly increasing his learnability. Every button press so there's 2 reasons for this actually. So one was a very subtle one, which was just the learnability going up. That, hey, every button press adds 20 heat. It's just everything is 20. It's much easier to learn. Just do it. I think there was some value in that. It's very small, but there was some value in that. The other is some of the feedback I got pretty consistently was that players really, really liked having more room to play in the danger zone, but what they missed was the ability to force overheat faster. They wanted to be able to cycle their spells and it's immediately overheat as fast as they possibly could. And the way this works out is live Rumble can, in like a 7-second span, can press Q and W twice each, which is 80, and then press E 3 times, which is 110, which is 30, right? And so through basically once you were done with your second round of spells, because each starts with 2 charges, you have gotten your way to 110. You have overheated in functionally 2 rounds of spells. And so it takes 2 rounds to go from 0 to overheat. With this change, with Harpoon going to 20, it's 20 plus 20 for the Q, 20 plus 20 for the W, that makes 80. And if it's 20 plus 20 plus 20 for the E, that's 60. We're at 140 out of 150. And so it's like, look, if you have any heat left over at all, you can also do 2 rounds of spells to overheat. So that if you go from roughly 0, like, I don't know, you got stunned for 8 seconds, or you were walking a lane and weren't spamming W, or, you know, whatever it is, if for some reason you're at 0, you respawn and they're fighting at your nexus, whatever, it is still roughly 3 spell rotations to overheat. And that is like a large reason of why is like, if you really try to just chain overheat and then go again, you get a fairly similar situation here. And actually, one thing to point out is because you're overheating for only 4 seconds and not 5.25, you can start that rotation a second sooner, which means you really can go from overheat to overheat in about the same time frame. So I know this can look really dangly. Why is this here? That was the feedback I got, and that's why I did this. So FYI, that was why that happened here, right? It was to let people chain overheat if they wanted to in a pretty similar time frame. Finally, Equalizer, nerfed by 30 to 10 seconds. This is, again, the exact same logic of I am going to ship as many mid-lane focused nerfs as I can, and then give you all the buffs for top lane, make your shield better, make your Q better at killing fighters, make your heat let you play a longer fight and not just hope I can one-shot the guy. Because if Rumble can't play a longer fight, all he can do is try to one-shot, which means all he can do is brush camp and try to one-shot. If he has the heat to play a longer fight and he can do 2 rotations in danger zone, and he can do 30% max health over the course of like 8 seconds, that's really quite good, plus all the flat damage ability power stuff here, right? Like, that's actually quite good. It's 330% ability power ratio. It's like 600 base damage. Like, oh yeah, it's going to add up really quite well. And so giving him that ability is what this is about. So I think these are cool changes. Again, if we miss the mark on balance, we can ship more changes in 13.13. If it's really, really bad, there's a chance to micro patch. But I think these are cool changes. I'm really excited for them. I'm glad they're shipping. And yeah, I think this is a really fun project. Next is changes to Rise. More max mana per ability power. Magic damage on spell flux goes up on the ability power ratio. This is a really big one. Missile speed going up so that you don't outrace your E with your Q. This, I mean, probably should have happened, eons ago, but I'm glad the designer caught this. Very smart by the designer who did this work. Getting Rise in there. Rise is a champion that I think we should always try to balance to the point where he at least has some pro presence. I think Rise is honestly a pretty exciting pro champion. He has gank setup, which means you get some kills. The ulti play is actually really sick, considering Rise is essentially balanced around pro because of the fact that he has a coordination-focused ultimate. Like, if we can keep a 48% win rate Rise in solo queue and he's like chilling at 25% pro presence, that's super sick. Like, that's really awesome. Let's we should try to do that, right? I think Rise is one of the better mages for pro play. I think he actually creates quite a bit of gameplay. So as long as it's not tank Rise, right? Like, if it's AP Rise, we're like, hey, this champion's a machine gun mage and he's gonna do a lot of damage, and yeah, he can rely on Ryleys and Seraphs, but you can still just kill this dude, by landing a Nautilus ult into the team hitting him. He's not going Frozen Heart and Banshees and Zonias, and that build is correct. Although he's probably still going to buy Frozen Heart for it, to be fair. He's still going to do a lot of stuff. But either way, I think if Rise can be, on the squishier end of his build, is probably the best version of Rise for pro play. Otherwise, he's just like this invincible guy who cleans every fight, and there's no play around him. So glad we're buffing Rise. Good stuff there. Sivir is getting buffs. She was one of the champions that we determined was not doing too well in the mid-season update. We went for the big Ricochet AD ratio bump here. We expected this to be over 2% of win rate based on prior changes to Sivir. And so it's look, we're not trying to give her over 2% win rate. We'd like to give her more 1.5. That's why we paired a 0.3 attack damage growth nerf here. This should be around 0.5% win rate, something around there. And so it's yeah, it's 2.5. Let's lower it by this. So it's only going to be 2% win rate or so. Worth noting that a champion like Sivir actually uses her base AD at full value. It matters for her Q, and I believe it matters for her W 100%, and I'm pretty sure it matters for her Q. And so much like Kalista, base AD actually affects her spell damage compared to someone like maybe Jinx, where it doesn't affect her R, doesn't affect her E. Almost everything that Sivir actually does cares about her base AD to some degree. So meaningful change here. And yeah, it's obviously much more power to Sivir. So here is Sivir's. Here's the R cooldown on Rumble, by the way. Early in focus nerf. By late game, it's not very changed. And keep in mind, top lanes get the most XP in the game, and so a nerf that doesn't mean as much level 16 is going to be a nerf that doesn't mean as much for top laners, that little bit more. So here's Sivir's functional total attack damage with her most common build in mind. Obviously, in the real world, it's not down that much. This still means something. It has some effect, right? And this is, assuming what we have. Here's her base AD, and then 96 bonus AD at level 18 is that's Rune's first item in a longsword or so. Doran's Blade, maybe Eyeball Hunter. It's again a very rough approximation, but this is directionally what's going on with the champion. But here's the actual damage of an individual ricochet. You can see that you really can't tell that her base AD went down because the ricochets are clearly much better. Yeah, her single target is down, a little bit. She might do 5 less damage than single target, and she does 15 more to everyone else. Guess what? It's clearly a buff to the champion, right? So, yep, big Sivir buffs. I think she's going to be really good next patch. Cool beans there to her. Next up is Yuumi. So I mentioned earlier that, by the time we had to lock this patch, the only data we really had was the first week of LPL games where she was 25% presence, and most of that presence was bans, which means she'd been played 3 times, which means most teams didn't want to play Yuumi. Some teams were speculatively banning her, but most teams weren't playing Yuumi. And so the data we had was we could choose to preemptively nerf Yuumi because we're nerfing 2 other enchanters that are in this patch, and she might just take up the mantle of the next best enchanter. And so we decided, let's not take the risk. Let's nerf Yuumi for pro play. for the flow play risk, like her win rate in solo queue at the time was like exactly 50%. And it's like Yuumi can be at 47 and be a successful champion where, you know, she's aimed at onboarding players to League of Legends to a certain degree. Like she's intentionally, I'm going to use the term noob cannon. So is Garen. Where it's like, yeah, these champions aren't expected. Like their success goal is not this champion's in pro play. Like a champion like Azir or Ryze, it's like, we kind of expect that champion to be in pro play. They're high skill cap. They're honestly quite flashy. You know, Thresh and Rakan are champions that I explicitly tried to get into pro play. Rakan's win rate has been good all year long. Thresh's win has been totally acceptable all year long. I pushed for us to make changes to these champions to get them more into pro play. And the game is better for it, right? The desire is not to get Yuumi into pro play. The desire is to make Yuumi a very good champion for onboarding into League of Legends. Right, you get a taste for how the landing phase works and warding and landing skill shots and reactively using abilities, and you actually have to aim almost everything on her kit. Okay, E is reactive, but like everything else has to be aimed. Like, I know people are gonna like XD Lamau, you have to learn positioning. Yeah, I don't care. Guess what? Before you learned calculus, you had to learn addition. I'm not saying Yuumi is addition. Yuumi is high school math compared to calculus. Is my analogy here. Whatever. I don't need to defend Yuumi forever. Regardless, I will defend the merit of Yuumi's and many other champions like Yuumi being in League of Legends. I think it is very important to have Yuumi and Garen-like champions in the game, who you can access baseline power and baseline League of Legends familiarity with less effort. I really believe that. I think that is very good for League of Legends, especially long term. Anyway, Yuumi can be a totally successful champion at like a generic 47% solo queue win rate. Because okay, if you put in the time and master her, you can still be above 50 if you're like high mastery on Yuumi, which as long as that you check that box, you know, this champion is viable in the hands of someone who wants to be a Yuumi man. That's totally fine. But she's also going to be very successful in the hands of a new player who is learning to play League of Legends with their friends, and they're like, I have never played like Diablo or Path of Exile or any other click to move game before. They've played Fortnite, they've played Valorant, they've played pick your game, Halo, who cares? And it's like, I'm not like, for those kind of champions, like, I would like them to play League of Legends. Personally, I would like them to come play League of Legends and learn ARPG movement and learn MOBA movement, right? They right, like, we're really far away from the world where Warcraft 3 and StarCraft were things that people played before they played League of Legends. League of Legends is 10 years old. StarCraft 2 came out, like, while League of Legends came out. And other than, like, Age of Empires, and I'm, like, a big RTS player. Like, I played competitive Warcraft 3. So I've played RTS since, like, I don't know, 99. No, earlier than that. StarCraft 1 was in like 99. I played Warcraft 2 before then. Either way, like I've been playing RTS for a long ass time. I'm really good at click to move, you know, games. I'm good at click to move games. Good for me. I'm really going off on a tangent here. Sorry. Anyway, generically, I defend the existence of champions like Yuumi in League of Legends. Anyway, to move on. Right. We had very limited pro data. And it's like, well, Yumi's 50% in solo queue. We can nerf her by like 1.5%. And limited pro data tells us that she's not that big in pro, but she's a risk if we nerf Lulu and Melia that she might take up a bit more presence. So we did a preemptive nerf, and that was fine. And then literally today, we said, hey, should we day zero? Wait, no, sorry, it was yesterday. I think it was literally yesterday. Yesterday at lunch, we're like, hey, should we day zero nerf Yuumi? Should we prep a micro patch that will ship along with 13.12? And instead of going for 1.5% win rate, we go for a 3% win rate. We go right away to 47. We say, Yuumi, you're going to be on live as a 47% win rate champion. And we then hope that 3% win rate duck is enough to say, yeah, pro play, find something else. Right? There are other champions that are better than you. Go that way. We're like, actually, yeah, it's a good idea. Prep the micro patch. I script reviewed the changes, but the designer who did the first round of Yuumi nerfs just kind of picked more stuff to go for here. I think these are very good changes, by the way. I think these are smart things to do for Yuumi. Let's talk about them, right? So heal and shield power, instead of scaling on ally level, scales off her champion level, and consider you max W last. This is 5. This is 10 to 20 becomes 5 for a very, very long time, and at level 18 it's 15 instead of 20. But the middle part is way worse. Zoomies, ice, early shield nerf, and then also shield rank up nerf. This is trying to enforce Qmax for Yuumi. Emax appears to be slightly stronger, or debatably slightly stronger, and I think in terms of like gameplay health and Yuumi being a more interesting champion, Qmax being correct, or at least generically correct, is probably the overall better idea. But it's like, hey, right, let's have less overall AD carry multiplication. I think there's honestly a world where there's no AP ratio on the attack speed. And the AP ratio is be on the shield instead. I think that's maybe a choice, but like, again, I'm not designing this. I don't think this is like wrong by any means. But okay, less AD carry multiplication. But by nerfing the E rank up, right, we don't re-incentivize E rank up too much. Overall, less heal and shield power also somewhat, disincentivize ranking up E because you're getting less out of that as well. The total value of the E is of course lower. And then hey, final chapter healing down some more as well. It scales a lot with character level, right? Since it's just a flat -10. All these things will tend to be a little bit more solo queue skewed. The nerfs, sorry, her power is getting a little bit more solo queue skewed by being even more late game focused, and is going to be a nerf in pro for like, yeah, your early trading is worse, right? You're going to have a lot less attack speed on the person you're buffing, and your shield is -10, and your shield is actually -5%, and your level 6 power spike is worse by like a pretty meaningful like 20% or so. These are all like really good pro nerfs because pro tends to really, really care about the early game. So I think these are directionally, again, very good changes. So here is the functional heal on the E and the R, counting for her heal and shield power, scaling from 1 to 18, and the assumption of her getting to a full build by level 18. And so the actual amount of healing, or the shielding, I should say, from the E, right? Because here is where you're finally at the last point of not maxing W anymore, and then you start putting points in W, and obviously it catches back up. But like, right, you go from 14% to 19% less shielding from levels 1 to 13. R is 27 to 21% less healing, and then eventually you put points in W, and it kind of catches back up towards the end here. But yeah, a lot less defense out of the Yuumi. And of course, again, 10% less attack speed on the E until level 8. Pretty impactful here as well. So yeah, quite big changes in the amount that she shields and heals her teammates. Again, the goal is about 3% win rate in solo queue. I think we roughly will hit that. And again, lowering things like the attack speed should, I think, do quite a bit for lowering her pro skew. Because AD carries are really good at using their attack speed when they're really good at farming gold. And again, it's just an example of me saying like, hey, all these systemic ways of multiplying AD carries. Like, yeah, giving an AD carry a shield, yes, of course, that multiplies them because if they live longer, they get more damage done. But the offensive multiplication is one that's like, okay, they really just delete people now. And that's one that I think we need to be pretty careful about. And maybe we haven't been in the past, but it's definitely a direction I am leaning, is trying to trim some of the multiplicative scaling off of AD carries, and let them be good on their own. So that like the Janna is good because Lucian doesn't die, not the Janna is good because Lucian now deals double damage. That's extreme, to be clear. But like if Janna's like job is, no, my team lived, great, right? You've done a successful thing as Janna, that is awesome. And like I want to make sure like that is something that the Jannas can do. Because it also allows them to like support other people and feel good about that as well. Instead of like, well, I of course have to buff an AD carry, like what else am I going to Whimsy, other than Whimsying a talent who's engaging. So directionally, still really big fan of these changes. I think these are good stuff, and happy that these changes are happening. Next up is Zeri. So August took on Zeri changes. There were several possibilities of what we were going to do here. We were pretty sure really quickly that so this is interesting because this is the monkey's paw curled. So for a long time, we didn't have enchanters in pro play. Like there was the Ardent Sensor meta of 2017. So that was clearly, a big enchanter meta. But otherwise, we had very few enchanters typically in pro play. And it was like, wow, it's so boring having tanks all the time. It's always Leona versus Nautilus. Oh, wow, okay. That's not a whole lot of variation. And then okay, what if we get enchanters in pro play? The monkey's paw curls were like, oh, players hate Karma, Caitlyn, Ezreal, Lux, Lulu, Yuumi way more. Those are way less fun for people to watch. And so it's like, we got enchanters, right? Like over time, Riot redesigned champions to get enchanters into pro play, right? They did. That was the goal. And they got Karma in, they got Lulu in, they got Yuumi in, because Yuumi was like 0% pro business for a while. Like the first year, Yuumi was not in pro. And they like said, hey, what if we got Yuumi into pro? And the monkey's paw curled. And every designer I've talked to is like, I regret doing that. But like that's the thing is I feel like there are. So I've had this opinion for a while, and I know what designers have opinion well. Of like, no, you know what, Riot should really just curate the meta. It's like I don't care what you say on Reddit. I don't care what you say on Twitter. I'm going to choose because I know better than you. I know better than you. And it's like, you tell me that you want pros to have the chance to adapt and innovate and improve on the meta. Well, Vi's been there all year long, and she hasn't moved. Zeri's been here all year long. She hasn't moved. Lulu's been here all year long. She hasn't moved. Lucian's been here all year long. He hasn't moved. Gragas has been here all year long. He hasn't moved. Annie's been here all year long. He hasn't moved. Kasate's been here all year long. He hasn't moved. Wukong's been here all year long. He hasn't moved. Pros aren't changing shit. So it turns out it is on us because the meta will not evolve on its own. Even if we like hang out and let pros try to adapt, they don't adapt. They play the same stuff. We got variation at MSI because we buffed Rakan, we buffed Thresh, we buffed Nidalee, and said, no, here, try these other things. Try some Lee Sin. And they're like, okay, we'll try some Lee Sin. You buffed it. We'll play it now. Pros don't change the meta on their own. We have to change the meta. So anytime, it means, right, like, hey, end of the day, you can still, if you want to be frustrated with pros for not, like, changing the meta on their own, you probably could be. There's probably plenty of champions that just, like, aren't playing and could be. Like, that's probably true. But at the end of the day, we actually just get to dictate pro play because pros will make their choices, then they will sit there and be stubborn, and they will not change until we change it for them. That is what I have learned so far this year, being a designer on Summoners Rift team, is that pros will not make their own changes. So we will make it for them. And that's fine. I don't mind doing that. I'm very happy to curate the pro meta, personally. I'm very happy to do that. But it really means that, like, I don't want to hear the refrain of let pros adapt because they clearly don't. Not much. Not enough to where the game feels different. And it seems like variation is a really important thing for esports viewers, and that's fine. Right? Again, I'm not complaining. I'm happy to do this work, but it means that this is just our job. Right? Our job is to revolving door or curate the meta, and that's fine. So, Zeri, my understanding is part of the idea of Zeri passive, which no longer exists now, but where she stole shields and gained move speed, was to give her some enchanter binding to say, hey, wouldn't it be nice, since we have such a big tank meta, wouldn't it be nice if Zeri could be good with enchanters? And that's kind of interesting, right? Like, maybe we'll see some enchanters in pro play when you choose to play Zeri. That's kind of cool. How neat is that? And the monkey's paw curled, and then we had Zeri Lulu and Zeri Yumi for kind of forever. Careful what you wish for, because we got that. We got our enchanters, and it's like, oh, okay, turns out. So I think it's very good to remove this, right? Zeri has a passive. It is her charge mechanic. It's moved from her Q passive to here, right? That's great. Charge, auto attack. It's a good passive. This can just be fully deleted. And of course, this is some amount of power, right? So Zeri is, I think, the number one AD carry in pro play right now. She's like a 53%, I think, AD carry in solo queue, with Trinity Force, which is obviously a dominant build on her. And I'm kind of curious, like, how much win rate this would be, right? Like, this is probably a decent amount, right? 10% move speed when someone shields you is meaningful. Getting 45% of your post-mitigation damage when hitting a Janna shield or a Lulu shield or a Yumi shield or a Nautilus W or any of these, or a Guardian shield, a Thresh shield, a Rakan, right? There's a lot of shielders in bottom lane. An overheal from, Aphelios, etc., etc., etc. It's like, well, that's going to be pretty meaningful, right? That's a good amount of durability here. So this is definitely a meaningful amount of win rate, right? Okay, this is some win rate loss. And let's imagine you're doing like a Stormrazor build. You're doing, non-Trinity Force. Okay, well, if you're doing not Trinity Force, you lose the passive, you gain 5 move speed, and you gain 20% extra crit scaling on the bonus on hit damage on Spark Surge. That's probably roughly win rate neutral on non-Triforce builds. I would guess. Stormrazor Zeri doesn't change that much. That's my guess. I could be wrong here, but that's what I believe to be true. And then, of course, if you are playing Triforce Zeri, well, you also lose Sheen. There we go. Burst Final over End-Phase Sheen. So Triforce Zeri gets functionally deleted. Okay. And then secondarily, right, you have, compensation buff for this nerf. Okay. This feels pretty accurate. I mean, and the thing is, like, we'll go look at Zeri's win rate data, right, or the patch hits. I'm sure there's going to be some percentage of players who didn't read the patch note and they don't realize that Burst Fire no longer activates Sheen. It's worth noting, by the way, that it wasn't written here. I think this is true. So I saw it on an internal note. Maybe it didn't actually show up at the patch. A full charged passive will pop Sheen. It will trigger Sheen like a spell cast. So like the E will Sheen, the W will Sheen, the R will Sheen, and the full charge passive will Sheen. Not enough for her to ever go Triforce or Essence Reaver ever again, I don't think. Although I'm curious if it somehow happens anyway. Like, maybe there's a world of getting your E to a really short cooldown, and it's like, oh, she actually does a Quick Blades build, and then she really goes, like, late Essence Reaver, and she gets the short enough E cooldown that she uses Sheen with it. That seems fine, right? Like, if you go 5th out of Essence Reaver because you eventually get enough CDR, that seems reasonable to me. Like, I think that's pretty much fine. But I don't know. Regardless, an interesting note. I think these are again good changes. I'm actually glad of the pass removal. I'm glad of the. I'm generally pretty happy with removing hard synergies. Like it can be interesting from like a theoretical like we played an enchanter. We might want to think about playing Zeri here. But my experience has been, especially with so many champions in League of Legends, I tend to not like bespoke. Oh, this interaction is just hard coded to be good. Like I gain move speed when someone shields me, or I'm good against champs who have shields. Like I don't love that on Blitzcrank R, on Renekton W, on old Zeri passive. Because it's just like, oh, it's a specific piece of information I have to like hard remember, compared to like Braum, where it's like, oh yeah, Braum's passive is the thing where like you get 4 stacks and they get stunned, and it turns out that like, oh, that's like really good with things like Lucian who get multi-hit. But it's like, those are the things that are obvious to know about the character. Like, people easily know what Lucian passive does. People easily know what Braum passive does. And then those fitting together is like, oh, that's neat. That's a neat synergy. How cool is that? Like, oh, cool, that makes sense. Versus like, oh yeah, they picked Karma. Zeri's good here because she siphons shields. Is like, it's just a very specific rule. And I'm not saying these like things can be bad, because there's some that like work really well, like Yasuo ults off of teammate knockups. But that's like a very specific, like very large telegraph part of the kit where it's like, yes, Yasuo is the knockup guy. That's like a pretty easy thing to remember. And like, because it's the ultimate, it's just like people can understand the interaction and it's really obvious and in your face. And like, this is just very learnable compared to like, oh yeah, Zeri self shields sometimes when someone else has a shield, right? Like, in terms of like the types of inbuilt synergies and counters, those are the ones that I like more because they're sort of much more obvious, much more in your face. And I think those are, this is actually, so again, very big fan of the design work here. So Iron Sensor. So most of the item changes are mine. I, again, was tasked with diving into supports, and so assessing support health, and this is why I picked some support items for nerfs. I also did follow up on my own AD carry item changes to tweak things that were over underperforming in the AD carry space. So up first is an Ardent Sensor nerf. Ardent Sensor was one of the items that was scaling from level 1 to 18, so this 15 was fake. It also scales off ally level, so it's even more fake. And basically my read on Ardent Sensor is maybe it is actually correct for this item to scale 10 to 20 instead of 15 flat. Like that might be the better shape for the item. Right now in pro play especially, I'm seeing a lot of Ardent Sensor rush, which means, lowering the level 6 value and then like letting it be okay at level 13, 15, 16, 18, whatever, probably reasonable, right? Like this could have been 10 to 15 with the 10 is at level 6 and the 15 is at level 11. And it's like, if you rush this item first item, it's bad, but if you buy it second, there's no change to you. Like, that might have been actually the better option, and I didn't think of it, and maybe, that's a mistake. But the reason I did flat 15 and not scale up at all is, hey, this item already multiplicatively scales with, does my AD carry have a Hurricane? Does my AD carry have a Rage Blade? And what is my AD carry's attack speed? All these things multiply the on-hit damage of Ardent Sensor. Ardent Sensor also gives attack speed, which multiplies their total AD, it multiplies their crit chance, it multiplies Hurricane Bolts, it multiplies other on-hit effects, it multiplies all this stuff. So it's like, Ardent Sensor already scales with the game. Both halves already scale with the game. So it doesn't need to scale even more on its own as it further scales with the game. Because again, my overarching goal here is, can we systemically nerf all the ways that are giga snowballing AD carries and just let them have their own power? Like, I'm trying not to nerf marksmen because I don't think marksmen themselves are overpowered. I think the ecosystem that surrounds them is too marksman skewed. And it's like, this is why all these things have been happening, right? It's why melee is going down, it's why loot is going down, it's why Ardent is going down. It's like, no. The system is set up to only play towards ADCs. Let's move the system apart. And if Ardent Sensor becomes a weaker item, and you instead go Redemption, or you instead go Mandate, or you instead go Staff of Flowing Water, or you instead go Mikhail's, or you instead go something else, Knight's Vow even, oh, then you're not going Ardent Sensor, and so your support items aren't AD carry skewed, right? But Ardent Sensor is the single most picked second item slot in all of support. If you put all supports together, number 1, Ardent Sensor. And this is like, these are counting Braum games and Zyra games and Lux games. You put all supports in the game, and the most picked item is Ardent Sensor in second slot. It's like, we're kind of at an Ardent Sensor meta, aren't we? This item's a little overpowered. So it's not a very big hit, but we can do the numbers here. So again, anything early is fraudulent. This item factually did 20 to 30 damage. Now it's just 15 flat. This is obviously a pretty big nerf to the amount of on-hit damage. Yes, this matters. And again, this could have maybe been 10 to 20 stopping here or something, right? Something where it's like, no, really don't buy this item first, buy it second. Because again, in pro play, we are seeing it bought first a fair bit. But I wonder if pros even know that, we functionally nerfed at first item from 20 to 15 damage. I'm not sure they know. But that's true, right? But obviously it doesn't scale as hard, so few reasons to snowball your AD carry and play only around AD carry. Okay. Next is Bloodthirster as an AD carry change. BT definitely is performing very well. It is the most performant third item slot basically right now. It's used by a lot of other champions as well. Of course, the item giving 95 attack damage is a lot. I will defend Bloodthirster as the biggest big ticket legendary. I think that is a pretty cool space for it to live. Here's Bloodthirster. It is the biggest attack damage stat stick. It is the most expensive item. It costs as much as mythic items do now. But yes, at level 18, it's going to give you that much attack. It's going to give you up to 95 attack damage. Sure. I think this item is generally a success in terms of its theming, in terms of where it landed. It's just overtuned. It's overpowered. So a nerf to Bloodthirster of 200 gold, which is, reasonable. It's a nerf. I think it's fine. Gale Force nerfed it a bit in 13.10. Had to go much harder here. Ultimately, yeah, just had to go for a much bigger nerf. Of course, this 200% was 250%. It had 60% more damage than low health. It became 50% more damage than low health. But ultimately, Gale Force is just still significantly over. It needs about a 1.5% win rate nerf, which means you have to do kind of a lot. You have to take like 15% off the item is like roughly the math to lose about that much win rate. So losing 10% of attack damage, right, is one part of that, right? Just going 55 to 50 AD is totally reasonable. It still gives plenty of good stats, right? Gale Force still gives 7% move speed, and so now I think it's minus 10 AD, minus 5 AS, plus 7% move speed. It's still relatively similar stats to before, but it's like, yes, Gale Force. And maybe it was wrong to make Gale Force a move speed item. I mean, it clearly lands thematically, right? This item is about mobility. It's about picking your targets. It's about target selection. It's about being able to kite. But that also means it's kind of elite skewed because really, really good players are better at using actives and are better at using move speed. And maybe it's okay if Gale Force is elite skewed. Maybe it's like, actually, nope, Gale Force, maybe Gale Force is actually illegal. I think for now it's reasonable to hold, right? If Gale Force has enough of an opportunity cost, and it's like, yeah, it gives you less stats the other items, right? It gives you less damage to the other items. I think it is theoretically balanceable. It might have to be balanced around pro play. But, it's clearly overtuned, so it's eating everyone else's pick rate, of course, right? Why would you pick anything but Gale Force when Gale Force is this strong? So 10% of its stats are gone from attack damage. Okay, great. Next thing is the offensive damage, right? The active damage. And so instead of having a crit ratio, it has an AD ratio. This is all knock-on from getting consistent feedback internally and externally, the worry that Gale Force is going to be critically underpowered, that why would you buy this when you can buy Infinity Edge? And so I looked for as many ways as possible to make this item look better. I gave it a fat crit ratio so that the active could be higher. I lowered its cooldown. I increased its execution damage. I increased its base damage. I did everything I could to be like, look, this item is good. Okay, this item is good. No, buy this item. This item is good. Trust me, dog, this item is good. And it turns out, if we just shipped old Gale Force with no changes at all, it would have been fine. Maybe, I don't know, whatever. So anyway, kind of going back on all this, yeah, okay, so move speed, probably now properly compensated with the amount of attack speed that's lost, but the after damage now going back almost identically to the old version of the item, and so let's do the math here, right? So instead of getting up to 200 bonus damage at max crit chance, you get 45% bonus AD, which if you have 444.4 bonus attack damage, then you will actually even out from before. So let's talk about this. Okay, let's talk about Lucian as an example champion. Now, Lucian is a champ who actually, his most common build goes GA last. So you only get, wait, I griefed something. Oh, I'm actually really dumb. I know what I did wrong. I typoed here. Okay, there we go. 200, not 250. So here is how much damage before and after on Lucian. So even someone who skipped an item for GA, you lose 5 damage on the actual item itself. And then, of course, you lose some damage on the active here as well. So it's down 6 to about 10%. Okay, great. That's pretty reasonable. It's a small nerf, but hey, it is a small nerf for champions like Lucian and whatnot. If you're Yasuo, though, right, instead of only gaining 40 damage per crit item, of course you're getting 100 damage per crit item in the old version, and so it was way spikier. You got way more off the item, and so even in a full build, we get a bunch of bonus attack damage. We choose a pretty similar amount of bonus AD at the end, and it's like, oh, yep, okay, this item is clearly, especially in the mid game where you would have hit 2 crit items like really quickly, around here, it is clearly much, 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 much worse on Yasuo and Yone. I mean, these guys were doing clearly illegal things with the actives. It was their best item slot by far. This is going to be a very big win rate hit, right? This is clearly a really, really large win rate hit to Yasuo and Yone. That is very obviously true. They are really going to feel this. Yep, they're really going to feel that, right? At the end of the day, though, this item is like 3% or 2% or so over their replacement, which we are buffing some of the replacements, by the way. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But overtuned item was overtuned. So the risk was that assassins were going to poach this item. It's why I did crit chance instead of bonus AD. But ultimately, I don't think we're going to have a big risk of Khazix and Rengar actually poaching this too badly. I mean, we'll see what happens. Rengar does have a bunch of bonus AD through Bone Tooth Necklace, so maybe it does. I hope it doesn't, to be honest. But that's that change here. So obviously, meaningful nerf here, meaningful nerf here, meaningful nerf here. Right, three direct nerfs to AD carries. Shield Bow is just kind of out of purchase, not very strong. I think it is reasonable. Like if Shield Bow is overall less popular than BT, obviously BT is the more exciting item, it's the big damage item, but like Shield Bow should serve a purpose. Its lifesteal going to something moderately useful where you can actually feel it and feel good about it, I think is reasonable. The amount of AD this thing gives, the amount of damage it gives, I think is reasonable. I think the shield is appropriately sized, but hey, lifesteal goes a little bit is just nice little small increase in efficiency. Feel a bit better on the item. You are paying for defense after all. I think it's safe to have a decent looking item overall. So here's your shield buff. More nerfs to enchanters. Imperial Mandate goes down. Once again, it's an item that scaled from 1 to 18, which is fraudulent scaling. So I made it 8 to 18, which should make the numbers more appropriate. This is an item that you're kind of meant to build second. So I could talk about why an item could scale from level 6 versus 7 versus 8 versus 9 versus 10. I don't really feel like doing it now. We're already about 2 hours into the video. So, I mean, TLDR, it's, the damage comes online pretty early on. It scales a decent amount from the rest of it. But basically, it's just me saying, look, I want to nerf this item by about 20%. Mandate is the highest win rate second item by far in support. It's not close. This item is very clearly heavily overperforming. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to nerf this stuff really hard. I want to nerf this item. Its gold efficiency of stats is reasonable. And so, right, my internal model is still 90 to 100% roughly gold efficiency. And then the rest of the power is going to be in the active, or, whatever the unique benefit is. And we should balance the items around that so that they all have roughly the same power level of unique benefits. That way we kind of keep items from being like, oh, this is just a Sheen app. Like, this champ is a Sheen applicator because, the Sheen items are really overtuned on Sheen for some reason, right? Stuff like that. Anyway, bit of move speed because I didn't feel like nerfing it all that hard. This didn't have to happen, but this will make it feel a little bit less bad. But essentially, mandate damage is down 20%. If you got it really, really early on, it's technically not nerfed quite as hard. But from level 8, when you throw the pop down, by the way, the application is your level. This is your teammate's level. So anything that that is bigger late game, you're going to feel more. So I bought this level 9. I did 12 less damage, but my teammate did 30 less damage, right? The bigger nerf is this side of it. Now, again, still both halves are down about 20%, so it's still 20% weaker with the item. But going this direction, again, 20% less damage to the active. Trimming power off of enchanter items that are simply too strong. Another undercurrent is trying to lower the amount of burst damage from non-damaged champions. And saying, no, you're allowed to build a mandate, but mandate's going to be more about the mobility than about the damage output. Enchanters aren't just providing damage. They can provide other benefits that aren't just damage here. Because, if we can get them more towards Redemption, more toward Knight's Vow, more towards Mikhail's, they can have more defensive outputs that feel good, and we can kind of, have some more equivalence here. Mandate, by the way, is easily the second most common enchanter legendary. It beats Redemption, Mikhail's, and all these other items. So it's I would like some parity here, right? Would like these to be more comparable choices. Moonstone definitely underperforming. Her only good user is Soraka right now. And so it's a bunch of strict buffs to the item. Thank you very, very much. Good things here. Let's talk about the math. So here is Moonstone's power on a heal. This is based on allies level. So of course, as your allies level up, you will eventually get less here. But this is still much more green than red in a functional game. In terms of if you're a shielder, it is only green. Champions rarely hit level 18, so it's largely green for heals. It's only green for shields. So every Seraphine W, Sona Ws, things like that. Now, if you are in lane with your teammate and you're getting isolated single targets hits, the numbers are different. But again, it's largely green here. This a little bit less so here, but also your isolated heals on one person, like your Soraka Ws and whatnot, your Yumi shields even. Not that Moonstone is good on Yuumi right now, but either way, right, you're actually going to feel this. You're going to be here more because you're in the laning phase, and then you're into team fights a bit later on. And then, of course, again for shielding, it's just all green, right? It's just positive. So this is clearly, I mean, the amount of green here, it's like very clearly a buff to Moonstone. The fact that Moonstone is already a multiplier on your other items, it multiplies your AP, multiplies your heal and shield power, it multiplies your rank ups. It doesn't need to also scale with level. I think flattening this is directionally the right choice for the item. Again, it's already a multiplier. And it's cool that actually I really think it's really cool that shielders have a defensive output multiplier. I think that is really solid. It's unfortunate that Moonstone landed in a really weak state. It also landed with some bugs around AoE shields. And so actually making this item like actually good changes. Phantom I know is underperforming. 5 attack speed. It got 200 gold more expensive and only got 5 AS. That was obviously not great. So now it got 200 gold more expensive and got 10 AS. That is much more in line with being stat efficient. So Phantom Dancer should be a relatively okay champion, or a relatively okay item. This lines it up as a really strong like go-to attack speed item. This is I think the most attack speed you can get in an individual item that is not Rage Blade. It is the most AS you can get in one legendary at the very least. So if you're like, hey, I need AS somewhere in my build, Phantom Dancer is clearly best in slot for single target high AS. And it's like it clearly has that niche. And if that's what you want, then you can get it here. Rapid fire cannon. So this is interesting. So I'm gonna talk about AD carry damage ecosystems, right? So I'm attacking from a couple different directions, right? So one is the things around AD carries, giving AD carries less multiplication. Another is AD carries having less late game burst damage from not their kit. Right. So in an ideal world, I would love to buff AD carry items by like 5 attack damage, 5 attack speed, maybe crit damage somewhere. In a world where the game is not about the AD carries, I would love to buff the stats on their items. Tune them toward 100%. Make sure their crit damage feels good, the uniques and their mythics feel good and whatnot. But there are a lot of sources where they're just getting like a lot of freebies, right? And so a lot of that is support outputs and the types of supports that are getting played a lot, especially in pro play. The fact that it's not worth for pros to ever gank top lane, because why would you gank a Malphite lane or an Ornn lane? What's the point of that? So they're only getting gank bot lane. The fact that mid laners are like all CC champions, so you can gank for Annie, but like if Annie's just like Everfrost Tipper stunning, she doesn't need more gold to do that. She's lands mythic and she's landed all over CC. So anyway, the other side of this is non-kit burst damage coming from AD carries. Generally, I'm trying to have go down, especially in the late game, so that they can have maybe strong early game effects. So that their kit hasn't come online yet, but like their first item Storm Razor or their first item Shiv does something useful, or their first item Gale Force does something useful, and it's like, okay, my kit's not ready, but like my items can carry me on like item 1. And then I get to item 2 and it starts to shift towards my kit, and then item 3 it shifts more towards my kit, and then my 4 and 5 it's like, okay, my kit is doing all the carrying. The RFC helps me like apply headshot better. The Shiv helps me like wave clear so that I can like get around the map. Okay, fine, but like in PvP, my kit is what matters. That is how I believe all items should work, by the way. Like, this is not just an AD carry thing, but like, I believe, a large portion of eventual champion combat should come from, you're scaling your Q damage, your W damage with items, right? The bonus AD and the ability power and the magic pen all come from that. But like, if the more of your damage comes from the source was my Q, I think that is generally a good direction for the game to go. And so it's like, yeah, I'm going to trim some non-kit damage from an item that is overperforming. Rapid Fire Cannon is basically the second place, third item behind Bloodthirster. So again, still trying to nerf some of the kit multipliers and whatnot, nerf some of the ecosystem around AD carries. Okay, here's a place we can pull some power down. Meanwhile, Static Shiv is very lightly undertuned. And I kind of regret how I wrote this patch note because the buff looks like less than it is, but the buff's actually really big here. So instead of scaling from level 7, it scales from level 6, which means this is higher damage at level 6, but even higher damage at level 7. So it's not apples to apples, but it was like I chose clean numbers over the patch note reading as a buff. Maybe that's kind of troll, but whatever. But Shiv's basically going to be a lot better in the early game and then a little bit weaker in the late game. So here's a data table on Rapid Fire Cannon. Cool, yeah. You do a bit less energized damage, but like again, the average AD carry at like level at like 30 minutes is around this level. This is like the average level of an AD carry at 30 minutes, which is roughly when the average game ends. So like 40 less energized, 50 less energized damage is not going to break the bank. People really default to reading level 18 value as though it actually is a real value. The vast majority of champions do not hit level 18. But like everyone looks at level 18 value and goes like, wow, you removed 80 damage from RFC. And it's like, dog, you're buying it here. I removed 20 damage from RFC. What are you talking about? Anyway, whatever, minor thing, but like, yeah, less free burst here. You still have Storm, you still have Shiv as a decently can burst. But yeah, here's the Shiv damage, right? So it's like, oh yeah, it actually is 30 more damage here. It's still 30 more damage, 30, 30, 30, 30. And then finally at 11 plus, it starts to taper down. This much more appropriately tracks to melee minion health bars, or sorry, cast minion health bars in the game itself. This will tend to always do 90 to 95% of a minion's health bar. If you're in a solo lane, you can sometimes win the race here. And if you're like Yasuo and Yone, you actually might frequently one-shot cast minions. Keep in mind, you do 2.5x to minions, so this 30 damage bonus is actually 75 damage bonus. From my experience playtesting on 80 carry, is enough to one-shot casters. So Yasuo and Yone are going to one-shot cast minions for the majority of the game on Shiv. Just by the way. It also means that if you are going to play any kind of a hybrid build, if you're going to build like even just like a Dark Seal or like a Doran's Ring, if you build like a Doran's Ring on, let's say, Ashe for some reason, you will probably one-shot casters for the majority of the game. Or if you build on Vayne for some reason, right? Just like get a source of AP, maybe you sell it later, whatever. But it's like you can make the tech choice to like buy a little bit of ability power, and it's like now I one-shot casters. I think this is actually compelling. That if you want to hit a breakpoint, you can go do that. I'm intentionally making this item not one-shot casters on its own without investment. That is an intentional tuning choice. If you're really, really ahead of the curve, you have really, really extra XP, you might get the breakpoints anyway. But on average, you will not. And it's like, yeah, you can like press Kaisa Q or volley or something, get the rest of it. I think is totally reasonable, or you find a little bit of ability power somewhere. I think that's totally fine. So that's the damage on RFC, that's the damage on Shiv. Next up is Overheal. I saw some melodramatic comments on Reddit about how why would I ever take this rune ever again. The funny thing is, this is the strongest or second strongest Overheal has ever been. So this rune is actually quite strong. And I think actually, this is the kind of patch note that I think people will see and people will try. And we might actually get some change and see some fighters try this rune out. Basically, here is Overheal on Aphelios. Live Overheal scales like this. This is Aphelios' base health. I mean, he could buy a Doran's Blade, but like whatever, I don't care enough. It is weaker on Aphelios by a meaningful amount. His mid-game shielding is down by about 50 to 60. Okay, here is Vladimir with an example full build. It's obviously better at level 1, because duh, but even at level 18, it is stronger. Now, in the mid-game, it's not that much better, but yeah, it is strictly stronger on Vladimir as our example champion, who only gets about a 1,000 bonus HP. Nasus, Swain. Volibear's W heal is missing health, although there is some flat to it. Don't expect those things to happen, but who knows? But either way, we'll see if people actually want to try Overheal on some other champions, but moving it back 2% health to open up the number of users. We'll see what goes. I think it's a cool experiment. We'll see if people start finding it, start liking it, and play in this way. Mid lane gold goes back to no longer nerfed in mid lane. I think one of the big things that happened, honestly, that why we are in bot lane party so much is there was a change, I forget when, but the goal was top lane agency, and it was we're going to nerf the XP in bot lane, we're going to nerf the gold in mid lane, and so by definition, top lane wins. I think the goals of top lane agency were good. I don't believe the tactics were quite correct. I, on the current sprint, so I'm looking for getting stuff shipped for 13.13, am looking at doing some top lane agency stuff. I'm actually pretty pleased with the tactics I'm progressing, or I'm tracking down. Feedback I've gotten on the tactics has been pretty solid, so I'm hoping we get something pretty cool shipped for the patch. But yeah, I think mid lane gold, even the designer who did this change is like, yeah, we should revert this. And I actually believe that bot lane shouldn't actually be as XP penalized as they are, but to do that would be to nerf their champions in some other way, because obviously they get more XP, they have more health, they have more damage. There has to be a conversation somewhere, but I think levels are felt more than people realize. I think levels are actually the most felt version of progression, because it's very easy to press tab and see the difference in the scoreboard. It's a lot harder to do the math on how expensive the items are. So I actually believe that people who feel like they're behind are doing it based on XP. That's my belief. Anyway, mid laners get more gold. So anyway, going back to the part of this is like, part of the reason we're in bot lane party is so top lane has indeed had less agency than bot lane. That's been true for a while. That's accurate. But mid lane having less gold, right? I mentioned how top laners, especially in low elo, have more gold than mid laners. This is some part of it. It's only like 100 gold in this case, but like that's roughly the gold difference between low elo and low elo top and low elo mid is about this 100 gold. So like this is kind of where the gold difference comes from in a certain degree. And this, yeah, 100 gold is not a ton, right? But like it's still a quarter of an amp tome. It's still 5 ability power. It's not nothing. This gives a bit more agency to mid lane because mid laners have more gold, which means they have more items, which means they have more damage, which means what they do matters more to the result of the game, right? It is relatively small. It's relatively subtle, but it does matter. And so mid lane agency goes up, mid lane gold scaling goes up. The champs that they'll play who scale with gold, gonna play more of them. Good stuff overall. So more systemic damage nerfs, right? More systemic. Hey, the world around AD carry is too strong. So this is, I think, I'm really glad we're doing this patch. This is the patch after the big buff sharing update came in the previous patch in 13.11. So there's two sides to it. One, actually, yeah, basically. So hey, guess what? There are twice as many red buffs in the game now. Red buff is by far the stronger of the two buffs. Red buff is definitely OP compared to blue. So really, really, really should have been nerfed. Really didn't need to be nerfed. Glad we're nerfing it, right? That's a very wise thing to do. And the thing is, at 11, it spiked really hard, right? So this is 1, 6, and 11. So the slow actually jumped by 10. Now it just only jumps by 5. The heal jumped by 6. It only jumps by 2. And then just the damage per level, instead of 6 plus 6, it's 6 plus 4. So here's the math. Worth pointing out, yeah, so here's the damage for the over application of red buff. So it deals damage once, then after 1.5 seconds, then after 1.5 seconds again. So it's 3 ticks, but the total damage is this. Of course, level 1 red buff literally can't exist. You kill red buff at level 1, unless your AD carry steals it. I don't care, screw you. So yeah, these numbers don't exist, but it doesn't really matter either way. The amount of damage this does technically slightly nerf the jungle clear a bit by 4 damage per full application. It's not a very big deal though, so it's fine. But it does slightly slow down red star junglers, but not by a huge amount. Either way, it's level 11 where the jungle item's been fully combined. You get the buff sharing, the AD carry grabs this buff, and it's yeah, you deal 20, 30 less true damage to each person that you fight, which seems reasonable. You're slow. If you're melee, instead of 25 is 20. If you're ranged, instead of 12.5, it's 10. So the ability for Aphelios to chase you down by slowing you is reduced, because instead of slowing you by 12.5, they slow you by 10, which means you're more likely to get away. And so this is a big force multiplier, right? It's if your AD carries ahead and they can slow kite you, they definitely just win with no counterplay. You either one-shot them or there is no gameplay. Receive gameplay, right? Also worth noting, so the health regen also changed. I want to point out, actually, levels 1 through 3, the health regen is actually 0.5% per 5 seconds. This is why if, your Zyra or Ashe steals red buff from, the enemy jungler level 1, they have, no actual health regen. It's because they're getting 0.5% max health every 3 seconds, or every 5 seconds. It's actually very, very, very little regen. This is basically to say, hey, red starting in your jungle is not going to actually give you more health. You're gonna regen very, very little health. So, hey, if we take an example champion, the total amount of health gain per minute is not very much, right? And the buff lasts 2.5 minutes, so, we can actually just multiply this by, instead of 12, it's what, 30, 2.5, right? So it's oh, here's how much total health is gained by the buff. And it's yeah, it turns out you got less than a potion, right? It turns out that sealing red at level 1 gave you less than a health potion, which is why you didn't actually feel the health regen on this thing. That's if you never took champion combat and they would poke this thing off you, which of course is going to happen sometimes, right? So this is actually the total heal. And then yeah, indeed, the level 11 healing on this thing was just an absurd amount, right? It would full heal you 2 or 3 times over, and now it just only full heals you. And again, this is over the course of 2.5 minutes. It's a long duration here, but a well-deserved nerf for the amount of healing here, right? This is a good change. So wow, we're past 2 hours on the patch rundown, and we haven't started the TLDR. Yeah, this has been going on for quite some time. Let's try to go for a TLDR on patch 13.12, shall we? A lot of changes coming in largely as mid-season follow-up. So Ashe is getting buffs that are aimed a little bit more at support, but also at AD carry. 10 flat damage on volley and 5% additive damage on frost shot. So just increase the damage overall. There's an AP ratio buff on R, since Imperial Mandate is very common on support Ashe. It's a very light touch there. AD carry Ashe should be relatively balanced. Support Ashe will still be a little bit weak, but I think much more viable, as it's currently pretty bad. Gangplank, now that he's not building as much ability haste, gets a softer recharge timer on his E from levels 8 onwards. Pretty solid stuff there. He's getting less haste, so he gets more barrels. Speaking of fewer barrels, Gragas is getting a pretty substantial cut in the amount of regen his passive gives, down by almost a third if you can use it perfectly on time. Gragas still has incredibly high health regen, but very good to see it go down. In hopes of somewhat preserving his win rate, a small mana cost reduction on Q. Overall, probably will still be enough for the champion, but I think a really good experience win for everyone who is getting out-sustained by Gragas 24/7. Kante is really, really pro-bound. As far as I can tell, though, he has really, really sharp win rate growth with champion mastery, so he's actually not bad in the hands even of solo queue, people who just have spent the time to learn the champion. But of course, the #1 top laner in pro play. It's not close, so 1/2 second cooldown increase on the E. It's going to lower his overall target access, his overall ability to shrug off damage, shrug off getting poked. This is, I would suggest, actually a little bit mid lane skewed as a nerf, which I think is a good thing. If he's less flexible, it's a good thing as well for the game. For pro play, because he's not going to be able to just like press E to constantly dodge or immune spells from mid laners, right? Kaisa is going to hit her evolves much sooner. Function this means level 10. So the pre-patch Kaisa evolve breakpoint was pre-nerf Storm Razor plus Rageblade. She gets enough attack damage that the exact same level of Storm Razor Rageblade is once again the breakpoint. So that exact build has the exact same breakpoint there, but this now allows her to do things like Kraken Slayer, Rageblade, Doran's Blade, or like Static Shiv, Rageblade, way to level. There's a lot of new breakpoints here for Kaisa without having to just like buy an extra longsword. So pretty big benefits here for Kaisa. Khazix is 3 AD. His PvP damage is really not going anywhere, but he's getting slowed down in the jungle. He is, I think, the most banned champion in the game, and so Khazix is getting a 3 attack damage nerf. Kogmaw is one of the highest win rate mid laners, or sorry, AD carries in the game. Basically, for every AD carry buff we ship this patch, we had to ship an AD carry nerf as well to not overall raise the power of the class, which I believe the class itself is relatively balanced. It's just the ecosystem around AD carry is making it a very AD carry centric meta. And so a little bit of damage down from Kogmaw as one of the nerfs. This ends up being about a 3 to 5% damage nerf before items, and then of course less of a nerf as you get more of your damage from your item scaling itself. Lucian is getting slightly unbound from Enchanter, so now it pops anytime a nearby enemy is immobilized, but it no longer benefits off of non-heal and shield empowerment. Also, the damage is down by about 25%. So it might be up more often since Leona and Nautilus can trigger this benefit for him, but it does 25% less damage. So the total power of Lucian Nami is lower. The total power of Lucian Melio is lower. The total power of Lucian Yumi is lower. But the power of Lucian Leona, Lucian Nautilus is up. Hooray! We get to see more tanks in pro play. Lucian's less hard bound to enchanters. Great change overall. Lulu, the attempt is to lower her for pro play, but preserve her win rate for most people in solo queue. So 20 more shielding on the E, but 6 less on hit damage and 3 less armor is meant to be a laning phase focused lane bully nerf to Lulu, so you can fight back against her, win those early trades, and bully out the Lulu. She's a very clearly a scaling support. Her shield scales, her damage output to her teammate scales. She gives people attack speed. She's a scaling support. Her laning phase is going to be weaker, and usually pro play is very, very sensitive to the laning phase. Melio is just overpowered pretty much everywhere. He is the #1 support in pro play. He is also really high win rate in solo queue. He's like 52.5. So we're looking to do 2.5% win rate worth of nerfs. If we miss the mark here, he needs more. We will nerf him more in 13.3. But 2 armor, 0.3 armor growth, and less AD converting into damage on the passive. It's going to be pretty substantial hits, and we'll see what he ends up. But again, intended nerfs to Melio. Nasa gets 2% more lifesteal and 0, 20, and 40 seconds off his R cooldown. He's going to feel really, really good in the late game with this. Orianna gets 0 to 100 bonus damage and a 5% AP ratio increase on the R. This means a full build Orianna clears 1,000 damage on the ultimate. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's good stuff for Orianna. Hooray for her. I think this is a champion who definitely, of all the mages, deserves to have really good burst damage through her ultimate. I think it's her most iconic skill. It's one of the most iconic mage ultimates. I think this is definitely a champion who can really use that well. Rell is overtuned as a support. She's about 2% win rate over at support. When we locked this patch, data indicated she was about 2% win rate over at jungle as well. That has tapered off, but was already too late. So she will probably be a slightly weak jungler overall, but she should be a relatively balanced support now. Cast time down on Q, but that's compensated by 10 damage off Q, 10 damage off W, and 10 to 30 damage plus 1% max health damage off of E. So yeah, 30 to 50 less PvP damage, but also, again, faster Q cast time is going to be really meaningful for power of that champion. So, again, the goal is nerfs, I think, is reasonably sized. Again, and there's these mostly tread water in terms of jungle damage, but it's slightly down overall. Next, a big set of changes to Rumble. Functionally, the goal is shift him toward top lane away from mid, so lower base health, lower health regen, but more health growth. Very, very... pretty neutral early game PvPQ damage, but the damage is very much up in the late game. Minion damage is down on Q. Ultimate cooldown is weaker on R. Scrap Shield is stronger pretty much all points in time. Again, Flame Spitter pretty much buffed at almost all points in time in PvP combat. More attack speed on the passive, but it lasts for less time. And the big change is you have 100 heat to play with in the danger zone. From 50 to 150, you can play in danger zone. This is tested to be very fun for people. I think it's actually going to be a really, really fun change. People are going to really like this. So the goal is win rate positive for Rumble everywhere but mid. The goal is win rate positive in top, win rate positive in jungle. We will tune as needed with monster levers. We will tune as needed with other stuff if he's under or overpowered in some spots. There were easy numbers we can change and ship as needed with Rumble. Rise gets more damage and more missile speed on the E, which is positive as well. Good job, Rise. Try to get him back to some level of pro presence. Sivir gets 5% AD ratio back on Ricochet and loses 0.3 AD growth. This should be a pretty solid amount of win rate. Yumi gets nerfed, and we are targeting about 3% worth of win rate. Heal and shield power is going to be 5 instead of 10 to like 17 up until level 13. So a pretty big bump, nerf to the amount of total healing and shielding she gets out. Total healing and shielding she gets out. Zumi's shield down 10 to 30. Attack speed buff now cares about how much you get the ability, so a big nerf to her early game attack speed buffing as well, and then 10 flat damage per wave on the R. All these matter quite a bit. Pretty big nerfs to Yumi. Again, the goal is about 3% win rate. The goal is to get her sub 10% pro presence. I don't know what number we're actually targeting, to be fair, but when we basically locked this patch, we only had week 1 of LPL, and she was like 25% presence with 5 bans, 3 picks across 43 games. And so it's like, well, okay, we can nerf her some, but she's, clearly not top cat. And then LCK started, and 100% in LCK, and she's like 80% in LPL now. And it's like, okay, we should go harder. And so we actually found more nerfs for the champion, and instead of going for like 1.5%, went for 3%, which is why there's an extra nerf here and an extra nerf here that wasn't in the first patch preview. Zeri is getting the Enchanter synergy ripped out. Goodbye to the shield stealing and move speed on shield's passive. This is obviously going to be a fair bit of power. Also, the Trinity Force interaction, Q no longer applies Sheen. Those are the 2 really big changes. The rest are compensation buffs. Her crit builds are sub 50% win rate, so she gets 5 move speed and a bigger crit multiplier on the E to push her away from things like Titanic, away from things like Trinity Force. Obviously, the Sheen ratio, part of that as well. But yeah, that is the move on Zeri. We'll see what happens. Technically, her crit builds aren't very different from before because she does have compensation buffs to go with the passive going away. But she was largely paired with Enchanters and no longer gets move speed on the Enchanter buff, which is generally speaking pretty elite skewed, right? Using move speed is a pretty elite skewed output. So I think this is directionally a very, very good change for the champion overall. Next up, Ardent Sensor is getting nerfed. Ardent Sensor scaled 1 to 18, so even if you rush Ardent Sensor first item, it was still like 20, 21 on hit damage, so no matter when you buy Sensor, it is a weaker item. In my mind, Sensor is already an item that is multiplicative with 80 carries. The fight damage here scales with their attack speed, and Hurricane, and Rage Blade. The attack speed this item gives already scales with their attack damage and crit chance, and things like Hurricane, so and on hit damage and whatnot, so I don't think Sensor needs to scale even harder into the late game. It already scales in the late game natively by itself, so cut the scaling down to make it less of an 80 carry. Basically trying to make the game less 80 carry centric because there are fewer strong 80 carry multipliers. Bloodthirster is one of the 2 most overtuned third item slots right now for ADC. So a 200 gold increase, I think, fits Bloodthirster as the premier big, I buy this because I know I'm going to live and do a lot of damage item. I think it's a good space for the item. It's just a little bit overtuned, so 200 gold nerf here. That goes along with Rapid Fire Cannon, also was the second best performing third item slot, so just less energized damage is kind of a tap down. We can kind of scroll back up to this stuff though. Gale Force, well overtuned, really, really, really overtuned. It's about 1.5% over for 80 carries to my analysis, and about 3% over for Yasuo and Yone. So 5 AD, and then this is functionally a small tap down. It's like 10% less damage on the active for a conventional marksman. For Jhin, it's actually a buff. A full build Jhin actually does more damage here than before. So full build Jhin loses 5 AD, but actually gets a better active. But for Yasuo and Yone, obviously they don't get 2.5x value on this crit chance scaler. They get the regular value on the bonus AD. So this, in some cases, does almost half damage for Yasuo and Yone on the active. Again, this item is really overtuned on them. So back to the bonus AD ratio it is, and it should be pretty reasonable overall as an item. Immortal Shield both 3 lifesteal. This item is underperforming. Pretty easy buff here, 3 lifesteal. Mandate also overperforming. It is the highest win rate Enchanter Legendary, and I think is the third most common overall support Legendary right now in League of Legends. So this maths out to be about a 20% damage nerf, and then, hey, a little bit stronger on the move speed, but overall meant to be power negative on Mandate, which is just an overpowered item right now, and Ardent Sensor, the second most overpowered item right now, and the most purchased one in the game. Moonstone, underpowered, so a strict buff. TLDR, for shielding, it is always better, right? 30%, which is level 18 value. It's just always 30% or 40% in this case. For the heal value, obviously it's 3/4 of the way up. In this case, it's about 3/4 of the way up as well, or 2/3 of the way up in case it's a single target. So generally, a lot of green here for Moonstone Manure. Definitely a stronger item. Again, ballparking at 5% per cast is pretty accurate. So big buff to Moonstone. Definitely an item that was suffering. Only had one good user in Soraka, so good change. Phantom Dancer, 5% more attack speed. This item's undertuned. right before I can we already talked about. Static Shiv. This item is also very slightly undertuned, so a damage bump. This ends up being plus 20 damage at level 7, plus 30 damage at level 8. Plus 20 damage at level 6, plus 30 damage at level 7, 8, and 9, and then it's like 25 at 10, and then 20, then 15, and eventually like level like 17 to 18 slightly lower, but essentially this damage curve now more closely matches how much health cast abilities have to leave them about 5%, and so you can kind of clean them up safely at your leisure, or if you manage to get over leveled or get at least a little bit of ability power, you can actually beat the race and just always one-shot cast abilities. Overheal is nerfed for 80 carries and buffed for non-80 carries. TLDR, that's the math. It's about 25-30% nerfed for champions like Aphelios, where it's 100% pick rate, and then stronger, objectively 20% stronger on champions like Vladimir, for example. Manas once again get full guild for minions to kill in mid lane. I'm very happy about the change. I think it's a great change. Hooray. Mid lane agency goes up. I think, honestly, I think personally, my belief is the best version of League of Legends actually is mid lane is the highest agency role. Right now it's jungle, and then like mid and AD carry are roughly tied. Depends on the server you play in, actually. Korea has really high AD carry and really low jungle agency, like in their statistics. But for most other servers, mid and AD carry are pretty tied. Top lane is a little bit behind those. I believe the best version of League of Legends is one where mid lane is number 1. And then like, you know, as an individual role, I believe mid lane should be the highest agency lane in the game. I think they can do the most things. I think they have the coolest champions. Just my personal belief. If I had my way, I could snap my fingers. It's mid lane is 23% and everyone else is like 19. That's what I would want. Okay, that's probably fraudulent. Mid lane is 23. Mid lane is 22. Everyone else is 20. Support is 18. Is like that. If I could snap my fingers, I would like that. That's what I would target. Personally, that's what I would target. If I could like find a way to do that magically with like the game health still being good, that's what I would target. My belief. Anyway, whatever. If sports scales go too well, they just end up being second. You just end up playing second mage down there. So anyway, moving forward, yeah, that is so. I'm glad we're getting some mid lane agency back. I think it's a good thing for the game. Hooray. Red buff getting nerfed in the late game. Just simple damage scaling down. This ends up being like 15% less damage by the late game. Slow amount no longer spikes really, really hard. This is, by the way, 1, 6, 11. Keep in mind that buff sharing is doubling the number of red buffs in the game, late game. And so 25% slow becomes 20% slow for Wukong and Vi, who now always get it, by the way. Junglers always get a copy, as long as they walk. And for the AD carries who were getting it donated to them, they're getting, instead of a 12.5% slow, they're getting a 10% slow. But for, again, level 11 onwards, which is like pretty easy to have. Solid nerf, kind of abilities down, regen down quite a bit as well. So they can rely a bit more on lifesteal for doing it, but this is obviously a huge lifesteal, or a huge amount of regen spikes, so now it's only incredibly high instead of absurd. I think really good changes here to nerf red buff. This was someone else on the team suggestion. I was like, it's a really good idea. We should nerf red buff. We got it on the backlog. We got it in for the patch, I should say, and we nerf red buff. So that is the patch. 2.5 hour rundown. This was really, really long. I keep getting longer and longer rundowns. To be fair, I had a really, really heavy hand in this patch. I was in charge of 2 lanes and 2 lanes item systems, and did just a lot of the pro investigation and suggestions here. So I had a really heavy hand in this patch. I'll probably have a really heavy hand in 12.13 as well, so it's probably going to be another 2 hour rundown in the future there as well. Either way, hope you enjoyed it. I think it's a really good patch. I think there's some really, really good stuff here. I think this is a super stellar patch. I'm really happy about it. I think it's going to be really good for the game. Excited to watch what happens in the meta as a result of this one. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.